Chapter 75. Chapter 75. Peng Zhan's analyst wanted to drag the man to Peng Zhan's office in the washroom, but on second thoughts, the people who worked at the top of the company were either shareholders, general managers, or vice presidents. Not a single one of them was a small fry. Putting aside the fact that Peng Zhan wouldn't be willing to admit it, Linny was afraid that this man wasn't just one person, but a group of people. Judging from the people he'd called, he had a lot of accomplices. Pulling him out wouldn't necessarily be the same for his accomplices. Besides, Peng Zhan wouldn't be able to deal with someone at the level of a vice CEO with just a few words. There were bound to be a lot of factions forming when a company grew to a certain point, and Peng Zhan was the biggest shareholder. He couldn't just touch the people of the other shareholders, and there was a high chance that the person on the phone was one of the shareholders. That was why Lin Yi decided to disguise himself as someone who came to the wrong floor to avoid alerting the enemy. That way, the man in the bathroom wouldn't suspect anything. Lin Yi walked to Peng Zhan's office and saw that the door was open. Faubert was standing beside Peng Zhan, reporting something to him. Peng Zhan nodded repeatedly, a satisfied smile on his face. He raised his head when Lin Yi appeared at the door. "Lin Yi, you're here. Come in and have a seat." "Uncle Chu." Lin Yi closed the door behind him as he walked in. He wanted to talk to Peng Zhan about what he'd heard in the bathroom. "Lin Yi, I heard that you got into a conflict with some gangsters yesterday?" Peng Zhan asked straightforwardly after getting Lin Yi to sit on the sofa in front of his desk. Lin Yi could tell that Peng Zhan's tone wasn't one of condemnation, but one of deep concern. This touched Lin Yi's heart. He was just a personal study companion he'd hired to accompany his daughter in her studies, and yet he cared for him so much. It was rare. However, Lin Yi also had some doubts. If it were someone else, the first thing they would talk about would be to fire him and not implicate his daughter. "Yes, someone called Zhong Pingliang sent him to deal with me." Lin Yi didn't try to hide anything as he told Peng Zhan the truth. "But I'm guessing that Heibao will take care of everything by himself in the police station, and Pingliang won't get involved." "Oh, Zhong Pingliang? Do you have a problem with him?" Peng Zhan was even more puzzled. Lin Yi had only been in school for a few days. How did he make an enemy like this? From the looks of it, Pingliang had hired a criminal, even with a gun. Lin Yi smiled bitterly. "It's my fault. Mr. Chu, let me explain." Faubert saw that Lin Yi didn't mention anything about Meng Yao, and naturally knew that he meant well. But as Peng Zhan's confidant, he didn't hide anything from Peng Zhan. "Oh, you know about it?" Peng Zhan blinked. He didn't expect Faubert to know about the conflict between Lin Yi and Pingliang. "Mr. Chu, it's like this." Faubert nodded with a bitter smile. "That day when the Miss saw you, Mr. Lin, she wasn't too satisfied with Mr. Lin acting as her shield, so she wanted to test it out. It just so happened that Pingliang was the Miss's pursuer, and he kept bugging the Miss, so the Miss asked Mr. Lin to deal with him. All right, there's no need to continue." "I get it." Peng Zhan shook his head with a bitter smile after listening to Faubert's story. This was all his precious daughter's fault. Yao Yao likes to mess around, so don't give in to her. She needs someone to keep her in check. Don't mess around with her next time. We almost got into big trouble this time. If it weren't for your skills, who knows what would have happened? Haha, Uncle Chu, I'm fine. Lin Yi was speaking the truth. He really didn't see Heibao Bro as a threat. A small fry like him would only be cannon fodder in the front lines. This Zhong Pingliang. I'll have to talk to Principal Ding Bingong about it. A student like him shouldn't be allowed to stay in school. Peng Zhan was quite pissed off at this Zhong Pingliang. "Mr. Chu, this Zhong Pingliang is Director Jin's nephew." Li Fu reminded Chu Chuyin as he had a record of all this information. "Oh." Peng Zhan frowned. He didn't expect this Zhong Pingliang to have such a connection. Peng Zhan was the chairman of Peng Zhan Industries, the biggest shareholder, but there were many other shareholders in the board of directors. They didn't have as many shares as Peng Zhan, but they still had a lot of weight. As a result, Peng Zhan couldn't afford to offend the other shareholders over such a small matter. Peng Zhan Industries was one of the shareholders of Songshan's first school, so naturally, Director Jin was one of the shareholders as well. Ding Bingong wouldn't be able to handle things like this. Peng Zhan thought about it for a moment. He'd be graduating soon anyway, so he gave up on the idea of changing Zhong Pingliang. "Uncle Chu, don't worry about it after this incident. Zhong Pinliang's probably going to behave like a coward in school from now on. Linny didn't care about him at all. Yeah, I'm really sorry about this. I may be in charge of a corporation, but there are many things that I can't do. Peng Zhan sighed. Uncle Chu, I was just about to talk to you about this. Linny saw that Peng Zhan had changed the topic to company management, so he didn't have to find an excuse anymore. Uncle Chu, have you figured out what happened with the bank robbery that day? Right now, I only suspect that there's something unusual about it, but I haven't figured it out yet. Peng Zhan didn't try to hide it. We can already confirm that they were after Yao Yao. Robbing a bank was just an excuse. They didn't make a move on Yao Yao earlier or later, but they just had to make a move on me when I was out in the city for business. This motive is very suspicious. Lin Yi praised inwardly. Peng Zhan was indeed the helmsman of a large corporation, being able to come up with such a conclusion with just a few clues. It wasn't bad at all. His suspicions weren't far from the truth. Chapter 76. What kind of mission, but this is the first time I'm working with their company. They probably don't know me that well, so I don't have any evidence to back up my suspicions. Peng Zhan shook his head, as if denying his own guess. Uncle Chu, I heard a man talking on the phone when I went to the washroom. Lin Yi told Peng Zhan what he'd overheard. Peng Zhan frowned as he listened to Lin Yi's words. He'd suspected that there was something wrong with the company he'd been working with earlier, and they'd almost signed the contract. But when he'd arrived, they'd been using all sorts of excuses to push the contract away, as if they were waiting for something. They'd been looking at the time non-stop, and when the contract didn't come, they'd come up with an excuse, saying that the contract wasn't ready yet, and that they needed a meeting to discuss it. Peng Zhan was pissed at the company for going back on their word, but the contract hadn't been signed yet, and they had the right to go back on their word. Peng Zhan could only say a few words about working with them in the future before leaving in a hurry. However, the other party's actions had raised his suspicions. He hadn't thought much of it at first, but after learning that Ming Yao had been kidnapped by the bank robbers, Peng Zhan wondered if there was a connection between the two incidents. But on the surface, the two incidents didn't seem to be related at all. Peng Zhan couldn't find any connection between the two, and he only had his suspicions. But after listening to Lin Yi's words, Peng Zhan understood everything. The other party hadn't intended to be sincere from the start, and they'd resorted to kidnapping his daughter to force him to achieve their goal. Indeed, if his daughter hadn't been rescued by Lin Yi and had been kidnapped instead, Peng Zhan would have had no choice but to agree to some benefits for his daughter's safety, as long as the other party revealed the slightest bit of information during the negotiation. The other party could have denied everything afterward, since it was only a bank robbery, and his daughter had only been taken as a hostage. With this layer of cover, the fact that the other party had carried out the kidnapping would have been easily covered up. No wonder the other party kept looking at the time, as if they were waiting for something. This was what they were waiting for. From what Lin Yi had said, the man on the phone in the washroom had to be someone high up in the company, since he was on the top floor of the company. With this person working together, the other party's plan was flawless. But of all things, of course, they hadn't considered the possibility of Lin Yi's presence. It seemed that of his daughter's side had been a wise decision after all. Peng Zhan had only arranged Lin Yi to stay by Meng Yao's side of the company, of his mind of all of his plans. Of all, Peng Zhan hadn't thought of anything else. Yet, Lin Yi of his. I will look into this matter. I'll investigate this. Peng Zhan's eyes flashed fiercely. He might have had conflicts with some of the higher-ups in the company, but he wouldn't allow anyone to use his daughter to mess things up. Lin Yi nodded. He didn't want to get involved in these things. As the chairman of the company, Peng Zhan naturally had his own methods. Lin Yi only told Peng Zhan what he'd heard. As for how to carry it out, that was up to Peng Zhan. You didn't alert the enemy, did you? Peng Zhan suddenly thought of an important problem. Did Lin Yi alert the other party when he was eavesdropping in the washroom? If the other party was alerted, it'd be difficult to catch the other party's tail. Don't worry, Uncle Chu. Lin Yi smiled. I was shocked when Faubert called, but I pretended to be someone who came to the company for business and went to the wrong floor. Lin Yi told Peng Zhan everything he'd said to himself. Haha, not bad. You're quite alert. Peng Zhan praised. The more he looked at Lin Yi, the more pleased he was with him. At first, It was his old father's wish, and Peng Zhan was just following the old man's wishes. But now, he truly felt that Lin Yi was a rare talent. Peng Zhan's father, Chu Sanhua, was a man of authority in the family. He'd started out as a small bricklayer, building up Peng Zhan Industries from scratch. Now that Peng Zhan Industries was in Chu Peng Zhan's hands, Chu Sanhua was still a man of authority in the family. Peng Zhan's family was very poor when he was young, and Chu Sanhua established Peng Zhan Construction when he was 7 or 8, growing it up step by step. That was why he wasn't tainted by the bad habits of those rich second generations. He also had the demeanor of a big family and was very respectful to his father. Many of the shareholders in the company were old friends who had built up the company with his father. Although the shares were now in the hands of their children and grandchildren, some of them were starting to get restless, but Peng Zhan didn't do anything to them out of consideration for his father's face. But today's incident had crossed Peng Zhan's bottom line. Meng Yao was his only daughter, and these people dared to mess with his daughter. This was the first time Peng Zhan had been angered. "Right, Uncle Chu, can you tell me what mission you have for me to do?" Lin Yi asked after some hesitation. He'd better take advantage of today's opportunity to ask this question. He'd been in Songshan for a few days now, and he hadn't seen any important missions for him to do, other than accompanying Meng Yao to and from school, making her breakfast, and taking care of a few clowns. It was an easy life, but Lin Yi didn't feel at ease. He was here for a big mission, and it was said that this mission would be enough for him to eat and drink for the rest of his life. But Lin Yi didn't think that accompanying the miss to school would be enough for him to eat and wear for the rest of his life. Oh, a mission. Peng Zhan looked at Lin Yi oddly. It's a very important mission, but the most important thing right now is for you to build a good relationship with Meng Yao. That's the only way to ensure the success of the mission. Wah! Lin Yi was startled. Build a good relationship with Meng Yao? Only then could he carry out the mission? Just what kind of mission was this? Could it be that it had something to do with Meng Yao? Could it be that there was someone behind the scenes who wanted to harm Meng Yao, and Peng Zhan wanted to use Meng Yao as bait so that he could find the person behind the scenes? That was the only thing Lin Yi could think of. Peng Zhan's words didn't make sense, and he was still confused. But according to Lin Yi's experience in missions, most employers would keep their missions a secret. They wouldn't reveal the details until the very last moment. Chapter 77. Killing Intent. Uncle Chu, I'll be heading to school if there's nothing else. Lin Yi had said what he needed to, and the rest was up to Peng Zhan. All right. Peng Zhan nodded. Don't tell Yao Yao about what happened today. I don't want her to be troubled. Don't worry, Uncle Chu, I won't say anything. Lin Yi stood up and prepared to leave. Li Fu, send you to school. Peng Zhan instructed Faubert. All right, Mr. Chu. Faubert nodded. No need. I'll just get a taxi downstairs. Lin Yi said quickly. He'd planned on going to the pharmacy, and he didn't want Faubert to follow him. There were some things he didn't want others to know. That's fine. Peng Zhan didn't insist after Lin Yi said so. I'll leave Yao Yao's safety in your hands before I deal with the company's problems. Huh. Lin Yi waved his hand. Uncle Chu, my mission has something to do with Miss Chu. Naturally, I won't let anything happen to her before the mission is completed. Peng Zhan nodded, sighing softly. He'd thought that he'd let Lin Yi take advantage of the situation, but it seemed that Lin Yi wasn't too interested in Meng Yao. He didn't know what his father was planning, but whatever he said, he'd do as he'd said. Li Fu, inform the administrative department, tell them to prepare a meeting room. I'm having a board meeting in the afternoon. Peng Zhan didn't insist when Lin Yi refused to let Faubert see him off because he had something he needed Faubert to arrange. All right, Mr. Chu. Faubert nodded before leaving Peng Zhan's office. Peng Zhan had a secretary, but there were many things he couldn't let his secretary know. Only Faubert, his confidant, knew. So, in many cases, Faubert took on the role of a secretary. Lin Yi walked out of Peng Zhan's building and flagged down a taxi. Young man, where are you going? After getting in the car, the driver pressed the odometer on the meter and asked, Sir, do you know where I can buy wholesale Chinese medicine? Lin Yi wasn't familiar with the geography of Songshan, but some of the older taxi drivers were living maps. They knew everything about the city like the back of their hands. Oh, are you talking about Chinese medicine? The ones made from twigs and twigs, or the ones made from twigs? The driver didn't know what Lin was looking for. Huh. Lin couldn't help but chuckle at the driver's description. In the eyes of normal people, Chinese medicine was more or less the same as sticks of grass. Loose sticks of grass. Lin didn't bother correcting them. The girl wasn't a professional, after all, and it was fine as long as she could understand him. If you're talking about wholesale, you'll have to go to Qiaonan Village's Chinese medicine wholesale market, the driver said, but it's not in the city. It'll take half a day to get there. If you don't want to buy much, you can go to a bigger pharmacy. Lin gave up on the idea of going to the wholesale market after hearing the driver's words. He didn't need to go there right now, at least. He could buy some at the pharmacy first. Then help me find a bigger pharmacy. That's easy. The driver started the car. After a few turns, the car stopped in front of a big pharmacy. It seemed that the driver didn't go around in circles. The fare on the meter was still the starting fare. Lin paid the fare and thanked the driver before walking into the pharmacy. When he entered the pharmacy, Lin sighed. It seems that medicine is a very profitable industry no matter when. There are so many people buying medicine in the pharmacy during the day. Many common medicine counters are already full of people. However, Lin wanted to buy Chinese herbal medicine. There were relatively few people buying this kind of thing. He handed the list in his hand to the salesperson. The salesperson gave Lin a receipt and asked him to pay. Lin needed a lot of Chinese medicine. It would take a while to weigh it. Fortunately, there were no other customers. Lin took advantage of the time when the salesperson was weighing and walked around the pharmacy. Jinchuang medicine. A voice caught Lin's attention. Jinchuang medicine? Lin was stunned. There is such a medicine? The so-called Jinchuang medicine referred to metal objects such as knives. In ancient times, the weapon that hurt people the most should be weapons. Therefore, Jinchuang also referred to weapons, and chuang meant wounds. Therefore, Jinchuang medicine referred to medicine that specialized in treating metal injuries, such as knife wounds. Its effects were hemostasis, analgesia, and anti-inflammatory. However, Jinchuang medicine was just a name in ancient times. There didn't seem to be any medicine called Jinchuang medicine now, right? No, it's sold out. The salesperson answered the person who asked for the medicine with a blank expression. Lin took a look. The person who asked for the medicine was a girl in black. She was wearing a navy cap on her head. The brim of the cap was very low, and her face couldn't be seen clearly. After getting the reply from the salesperson that the medicine was sold out, the girl didn't say anything. She turned around and left, but her steps were a little unsteady. Suddenly, Lin's eyes were fixed on the girl's feet. On the ground that the girl walked on, there was a clear trail of blood. Obviously, it flowed down the hem of her pants. However, in this pharmacy with people coming and going, it didn't attract anyone's attention. The blood trail was quickly stepped on by the people walking back and forth. The reason why Lin paid attention to this girl was because Lin was a little curious about the Jinchuang medicine she mentioned. Secondly, it was because Lin sensed a trace of the same kind of aura from her, murderous aura. Murderous aura was a very mysterious thing. Murderous aura was actually a signal emitted by animals when they attacked each other. This signal needed to be detected by the sixth sense. Someone once did such an experiment. They put a wild cat and a mouse in a box, separated by two thin soundproof boards in the middle. The distance between the two boards wasn't very far. Then, they eliminated the smell, and they couldn't see each other. As a result, the cat seemed to sense something and wanted to pass through the board. It kept scratching the board with its claws, while the mouse curled up on the other side. It could be seen that the cat could sense that the mouse was next door, and the mouse could also sense the cat. But how did the cat and the mouse sense each other? According to the explanation of scientists, this might be the sixth sense in addition to the five senses of animals. In other words, they didn't use their ears, nose, or eyes to detect each other. Animals could use their sixth sense to sense a signal emitted by their natural enemies or other animals that wanted to attack them. This signal could be interpreted as murderous aura. Chapter 78. About or note: a normal person might not be able to detect the murderous aura radiating from the girl, but Lin, who was in the same line of work, could keenly sense it. It could also be called a sixth sense. But while Lin noticed the girl didn't notice Lin. After all these years of training, Lin Yi was able to conceal his murderous aura very well, but people who could reach Lin Yi's level were few and far between. In the end, Lin Yi shook his head. The girl's dressing was obviously to avoid attention. Even though she was injured, Lin Yi didn't want to help her. She might be in the same line of work, but the same line of work didn't want to be disturbed in the middle of a mission. Sometimes, people in the same line of work belong to different organizations, and they might even be enemies with each other. "Excuse me, what is golden creation?" Lin Yi asked the salesperson casually. The salesperson froze, then looked at Lin Yi as if he was an idiot, as if Lin Yi's question was stupid and naive. She didn't even bother to answer. "It's a surgical medicine, of course. We don't have it in stock." Lin Yi smiled wryly. It seemed like it was a new drug, and one that sold well. But while the salesperson didn't bother to answer Lin Yi's question, there was someone else who answered Lin Yi's question enthusiastically. Before Lin Yi could say anything, an old woman beside Lin Yi started chattering away. "Young man, you don't even know what golden creation is? You know Dr. Kong, right? Dr. Kong from a traditional Chinese medicine family. He's one of the leading figures in the Chinese medicine world." The old lady started talking about Miracle Dr. Kang's exploits. Golden creation is a quick healing medicine that Miracle Dr. Kong came up with. It can heal wounds so quickly that there won't even be a scar left. How is it? Amazing, right? So godly? Lin Yi did not expect Dr. Kong to be so amazing. His medicine was actually on par with his own. "That's right. I heard that it's a secret recipe passed down from generation to generation. This golden creation is given priority to the military. Due to the production capacity, a small amount of it is regularly supplied to the private pharmacies. That's why it's in high demand." The old lady said, "It's almost impossible to buy it from a pharmacy. My niece's boyfriend's third sister's aunt's fifth cousin is the manager of the supply and marketing department of XX pharmacy chain. Last time, I used his connections to buy a bottle. I heard that once it arrived, it was digested internally. How could it be sold on the shelves? Right?" Lin Yi thought, if this medicine is really as magical as this old woman said, it is not impossible for it to sell well. Of course, especially for young girls, it's so ugly if they get a scar on their body. It's not to heal the wound quickly, but to not leave a scar. The old lady said, "I heard that nowadays, people don't give platinum or gold as gifts anymore. Instead, they give golden creation as gifts." Really? Lin Yi was stunned. He did not know whether this old lady was telling the truth or not. "Of course, why would I lie to you?" The old lady preached as if she was taking advantage of her seniority. "Oh, I see. Thank you, but it seems that I don't need it for the time being." Lin Yi said to the old lady with a smile, "Yeah, you're a big boy. You don't need that thing." The old lady nodded. Obviously, she misunderstood Lin Yi's words. Lin Yi meant that he could make the medicine himself. There was no need for him to buy it. Lin Yi naturally would not explain. He turned around and went to the Chinese herbal medicine counter. The herbs that he wanted had been weighed and put into a sealed bag according to the type. Lin Yi checked carefully and found that 2 of the herbs seemed to have been stored for too long. They had gone bad, and the medicinal effect was greatly reduced. Lin Yi had no choice but to weigh a little more. He would win with numbers. He checked the utensils and tools that he wanted. After making sure that there were no problems, he carefully packed them up and left the pharmacy. It didn't matter if it was Chinese or Western medicine these days. They were all selling very well. Only the loose herbs weren't that popular in pharmacies, and not many people bought them. This was why Lin Yi was able to get out of the shop so quickly. After leaving the pharmacy, Lin Yi did not plan to go to school directly. He was already absent. It didn't matter whether he went or not. He had already bought a series of measuring tools and tools. Lin Yi wanted to find a place to make the medicine first. This kind of thing, of course, couldn't be done in school. Of course, he couldn't do it in Meng Yao's villa. The 2 girls would go crazy if the whole house smelled like Chinese medicine. The best way was to get a room by the hour and leave after he was done. With this idea in mind, Lin Yi was not in a hurry to go to school. Instead, he looked around the pharmacy to see if there was a suitable hotel to get a room by the hour. Lin Yi saw the girl from the pharmacy at the entrance of a deserted alley. At this moment, she was lying on the ground. There was a pool of fresh blood under her. Linny frowned. He didn't want to poke his nose into other people's business, but in this deserted alley, who would dare to poke their nose into other people's business, let alone if there were people passing by? If he failed to save her and she died, it would cause unnecessary trouble. Linny hesitated for a moment. He was also a person with a mission. It was not appropriate for him to poke his nose into other people's business. Moreover, in his line of work, he needed to be prepared to sacrifice himself at any time. Although, Linny also knew that if he didn't help her, she might not survive due to excessive blood loss. However, sometimes, Linny really couldn't do anything, especially this kind of thing that had nothing to do with him. It was obviously a troublesome thing. The girl didn't look like an ordinary person. Linny really couldn't poke his nose into this kind of thing. Gritting his teeth, Linny walked past the girl quickly. When he passed by the girl's body on the ground, Linny couldn't help but look at her with pity. "I hope you can make it." After that, he left quickly. But he didn't take more than a few steps before coming to a stop. Wait, that glance just now made Linny see something that seemed familiar, but he wasn't sure. Linny turned around and walked back to the girl's side. He bent down and stared at a ring on the girl's right little finger. When he saw the pattern on it, Linny sighed and quickly touched the girl's wrist. He found that there was still a pulse. Linny carefully helped her up from the ground and carried her on his back. Although the girl had fainted because of excessive blood loss, she still had some instinctive reactions when Linny carried her. She subconsciously struggled twice. Perhaps it was a conditioned reflex to the outside world. Chapter 79. Origin. When Linny had first arrived, he'd seen a motel by the roadside, but it didn't look too good. Linny had decided to look around for a better motel instead. But the situation was urgent, and Linny didn't have the time to look for another motel. One was already good enough. Get a room. Linny barged into the motel with the girl on his back. The owner was watching TV out of boredom when she saw a young man barging in with a woman in black on his back. The man wanted to get a room as soon as he entered, and she couldn't help but smile ambiguously. Her motel was actually quite low class. It was set up to provide a place for young couples without money to cozy up to each other. Most of them didn't care if the place was high-end or not, as long as it was quiet and clean. The owner had seen plenty of young men and women who came here to get a room, but it was rare to see someone as impatient as Linny, wanting to get a room as soon as he entered with a woman on his back. 15 kwai for an hour, 60 kwai for a day, the owner said to Linny. "Oh, I'll put down 100 then." Linny pulled out 100 kwai from his pocket and handed it to the owner. "Wait, take out your ID card to register." The lady boss was not blinded by the sight of money and did not let down her guard. Linny frowned. He wasn't sure if the girl on his back could make it, but there was nothing he could do about it. It was reasonable to register a room. So Linny took out his ID and handed it to the owner for registration. "I don't need hers, do I?" Linny asked. Naturally, he was referring to the girl on his back. He believed the owner would understand what he meant. "No need. Deng will be fine." The owner followed the rules when registering IDs. She wasn't trying to make things difficult for Linny, but registering one person per room was fine. After scanning Linny's ID, the owner took out a room card. "Upstairs, room 209. Go up yourself." "Thank you." Linny took the room card and quickly carried the girl upstairs. Along the way, the girl lay motionless on Linny's shoulder. If it weren't for the fact that he could feel her heartbeat through the softness of her chest, Linny would have suspected that she was already dead. "Who?" Linny threw the girl on the bed, then carefully closed the door, drew the curtains, and carefully checked every corner of the room. After confirming that there were no wireless cameras, he was relieved. To be honest, if Linny hadn't suddenly seen the ring on the little finger of the girl's right hand, Linny wouldn't have bothered with this kind of thing no matter what. She was just looking for trouble for herself for no reason. The pattern on the ring on the girl's hand represented an organization, a very famous international assassin organization. Although Linny did not belong to this organization, the founder of this organization had a deep relationship with Linny. The master who taught Linny assassination techniques was one of the founders of this organization. Although old Lin was good at martial arts, he was proficient in the kind of martial arts that could be used to fight enemies head-on. However, in a real mission, it was rare to face the enemy head-on. Assassination and sneak attacks were the key to victory. When Linny was 6 years old, old Lin sent him to his master for 2 years of intensive training. His master taught him all the assassination and sneak attacks methods. Although he didn't know the specific identity of his master, and old Lin never mentioned it directly, Lin could vaguely tell that his master was a really powerful person. It had been many years since he saw his master. All these years, Linny had always missed his master. He was Lin Yi's true master. Although old Lin also taught Linny many things, it was more like the kind of relationship between grandfather and grandson, and not the relationship of master and disciple. Moreover, old Lin never expected to be Lin Yi's master. Lin Yi only learned less than 30% of his master's methods, but he was already able to take the initiative in missions. One could imagine how powerful his master was. However, he was too young at that time. Even if he studied hard, it would be good if he could understand 30%. It was because Lin Yi remembered his master's kindness that when Lin Yi saw the symbol of the organization his master founded on the ring on the girl's hand, he changed his mind and decided to help the girl. Although his master had long stopped caring about the affairs of the organization, no matter what, this girl was still one of his people. I'll help you this once. Whether or not you can survive will depend on your luck. Lin Yi laid the girl flat on the bed, and the fisherman's hat on the girl's head slid to one side. Her short, black hair was scattered, and through the scattered hair, a slightly pale and delicate face could be clearly seen. Her facial features were very exquisite, and her eyelashes were long. However, her eyebrows were tightly knitted together. Even if she had fainted, she must have been in a lot of pain. Lin Yi was slightly stunned. He didn't think that under the fisherman's hat, the girl would hide such a beautiful face. This made Lin Yi a little surprised. Such a beautiful girl was an assassin? Looking at the girl's age, she should only be around 18 or 19 years old, similar to him. Lin Yi shook his head, but this was someone else's matter, and he had no right to interfere. From his previous observation, the girl's injury should be on the lower half of her body. However, the girl was wearing a pair of leather pants that didn't leak blood, so he couldn't tell where the injury was from the outside. Lin Yi was too lazy to look for it, so he directly used some force and took off the girl's leather pants. After taking it off, Lin Yi felt a little unnatural, and his breathing became rapid. Although Lin Yi's initial thoughts were very good and very pure, he only extended a helping hand to this dying female assassin because of his master's face. That was why he helped her take off her pants and treat her injury. However, if this female assassin looked like a male assassin, Lin Yi probably wouldn't have any special thoughts. However, this female assassin was very beautiful, and her figure was very good. Therefore, when Lin Yi took off the female assassin's pants, it was inevitable that he would have some improper thoughts. Any normal man would have such thoughts. However, what he saw next completely extinguished the fire of lust in Lin Yi's heart. The inside of the leather pants was completely dyed red with blood, and under the leather pants, the girl's pantyhose was completely soaked in blood. It was impossible to see the original color. Chapter 80. Healing. From the looks of it, the girl's pantyhose was probably attached to the wound. If he took it off, it might touch the wound and cause more bleeding. Lin Yi frowned. There weren't any surgical tools in the room. When he took off the girl's pants, Lin Yi had felt something hard. It was probably a dagger. Without any other tools, Lin Yi could only rely on the dagger. Picking up the pants, Lin Yi took out the dagger and swung it in the air a few times to test the feel of it. Then, he started moving it back and forth on the girl's pantyhose. Lin Yi was an expert when it came to knives. When he was 6 years old, he had been practicing with the dagger with his master. It was also one of the most common weapons used against enemies. Lin Yi only used the tip of the dagger to pick up the fiber connection of the pantyhose. He wouldn't hurt anything else. After a few moves, the girl's pantyhose was shredded to pieces. Lin Yi casually peeled it off and tossed it aside. Under the pantyhose, Lin Yi finally saw where the wound was. It was at the root of the right side of the thigh. The wound had been bandaged, but the bleeding didn't stop. Otherwise, the girl wouldn't have gone to the pharmacy to buy some Dr. Kang's golden wound. Other than the bandage, the girl's lower body was only left with her thigh. But Lin Yi didn't have any other thoughts. Lin Yi wasn't a psychopath. Even if she was as beautiful as a goddess, Lin Yi wouldn't be interested in a woman covered in blood. He used a knife to pry open the gauze on the girl's leg and started inspecting the wound. The injury was serious, but Lin Yi breathed a sigh of relief. It hadn't reached the artery in her thigh. He'd have to send her to the hospital if he didn't have professional surgical equipment, but whether or not she'd make it to the hospital was another matter. The wound was triangular. It was obvious that a sharp tool like a triangular knife had been used to stab into the wound. Due to the triangular shape of the wound, it was difficult to stop the bleeding with ordinary hemostatic medicine without suturing. Judging from the current situation, it was most likely that the girl had bandaged herself after getting hurt, but the wound didn't heal. Instead, it was bleeding profusely. She had no choice but to go to the pharmacy to buy Miracle Dr. Kang's golden creation, but she hadn't found it yet. On the way back, she finally fainted from blood loss. Lin Yi understood what the girl was doing. Assassins were a special profession, and they rarely went to the hospital even if they were injured. They'd take care of themselves if they could, in order to reduce the possibility of their identities being exposed. Knowing the girl's injury, Lin Yi could treat of the problem. The wound was deep, but it didn't hurt the arteries and tendons of the body. It wasn't a big problem. Lin Yi stood up and took out the Chinese medicine he bought at the pharmacy before. He quickly threw a few herbs into the utensils and ground them. This was a familiar process for Lin Yi. In the North African jungle, his own herbs were the most popular things among his teammates. Lin Yi had to grind a bag of them every time. It was impossible to use the gauze from before. It had been soaked in blood. Because the incident happened suddenly, Lin Yi wasn't prepared. Now he could only consider using other things as a replacement. Although his school uniform was newly changed in the morning, Lin Yi didn't want to take a piece of it off to bandage the female assassin. He got up and went to the bathroom, but he saw a disposable disinfectant bath towel on the shelf. Next to the bath towel, there was a small price tag with 40 yuan written on it. This kind of disposable disinfectant bath towel wouldn't exceed 20 yuan if purchased in bulk, but the price in the hotel was doubled. Of course, in addition to this kind of bath towel, there was also a bath towel provided by the hotel, but it wasn't disposable. This kind of bath towel was only provided to those who had mysophobia and loved cleanliness. It wasn't a compulsory consumption. Lin Yi took this kind of disinfectant bath towel. This thing was barely enough to be used as a bandage. He sprinkled the previously ground medicine on the girl's wound. The girl's mouth made a low, inaudible sound. It seemed that the medicine had touched the wound. However, Lin Yi didn't care about her. How could it not hurt to apply medicine? After sprinkling the medicine, Lin Yi tore the disposable bath towel into a few pieces and skillfully bandaged the girl's wound. Phew! Lin Yi breathed a sigh of relief. It's finally done. Now it seemed that the girl just lost too much blood. If the bleeding was stopped now, the chance of survival was still very high. Of course, the vitality of an assassin was generally very tenacious. Lin Yi probably saw that the girl had regained her life. After waking up, apart from being a little weak, there was nothing serious. After dealing with the female assassin, Lin Yi got back to work. He'd made the medicine for the girl in a hurry, so he'd only made the right amount according to the need. Lin Yi's own wound hadn't even been healed yet. It was all ground, so it wasn't a big deal. The medicine for young Huaijuan, however, had to be brewed slowly. The order and timing of each ingredient had to be strictly added. There couldn't be a single mistake. Even if the ingredients were similar, the effect of the medicine would be greatly reduced, and the desired effect wouldn't be achieved. This was why Lin Yi didn't give the prescription to Huaijuan, choosing to make it himself instead. This prescription wasn't as easy as the painkillers he'd given Huaijuan before, where all he had to do was buy all the ingredients and grind them together. Decocting this medicine, however, was different. On the other hand, Lin Yi didn't want this recipe to get out. He trusted Huaijuan, but he was afraid that Huaijuan would accidentally leak it out. This recipe would cause a huge uproar in the Eastern medicine world. Lin Yi found a place to set up the alcohol stove and clay pot, and started brewing the medicine for Huaijuan. The hotel had appliances for brewing tea, but it was still better to use fire to brew the medicine. Brewing medicine was a very tiring job, but it was nothing for Lin Yi, who often made straw sandals at home. Lin Yi looked at the time on his phone as he skillfully put each ingredient into the clay pot. After who knew how long, Linny heard a small movement not far behind him. If it weren't for Lin Yi's unusually sensitive hearing, he wouldn't have been able to hear it. Linny didn't turn back. He was at a crucial point in brewing the medicine, and Lin Yi couldn't afford to be distracted. Lin Yi counted the time on his phone as he pinched the ingredients in his hands. Chapter 81. Mr. Dongwu. Lin Yi didn't expect the girl to be grateful to him, but it didn't seem like she was going to let him go. Just as Lin Yi was concentrating on the medicine, a murderous aura came at him from behind, and the jade on his mountain twitched as well, sending a signal of danger. Lin Yi frowned, but Lin Yi didn't want to be distracted at a crucial time like this. Stop it! Chi-Chi was feeling very conflicted. She'd fainted on the way out from the pharmacy due to blood loss, but Lin Yi had pulled off her pants, and the pain had helped her regain some of her senses, clearing her head a little. Her body was still too weak, and she didn't even have the strength to open her eyes before fainting again. When Lin Yi was treating her wounds and applying medicine, Chi-Chi woke up from the pain once more before fainting again. As a result, Chi-Chi had a rough idea of what had happened after that. It was this man in the room who'd saved her, but at the same time, he'd seen a lot of things he shouldn't have. Her face, her legs. These were things Chi-Chi couldn't tolerate. She'd killed her savior after crossing the river, and that made her feel uneasy. But her beauty had only blossomed for one man in this life. This man in the room had crossed her bottom line. With that decision made, Chi-Chi picked up her dagger by the bedside and crept up behind Lin Yi. She paused noticeably at the sight of him, concentrating on the medicine. Was he brewing medicine for her? Chi-Chi's heart warmed, and she didn't have the heart to make a move. Chi-Chi had to admit that her heart wasn't as cold as other assassins, cold and emotionless. No matter what, this man in the room was her savior. Just as Chi-Chi was hesitating, Lin Yi told her to stop it, like he was scolding a child. Chi-Chi was visibly taken aback. She was going to kill him, and he was telling her to stop? Did he think that she was just going to walk around the room? Didn't you hear the story of Mr. Dongwu when you were young? Lin Yi still didn't turn around. He continued, I feel like I'm like Mr. Dongwu in that story. Chi-Chi's face changed. Naturally, she knew about Mr. Dongwu's story. She'd grown up in an assassin organization, but she was different from the other assassins. Other than the assassin training, she'd received other forms of education. Mr. Dongwu's story was actually a classic fable. It was about a man named Mr. Dongwu who saved a wolf, but the wolf turned around and wanted to eat Mr. Dongwu. But Lin Yi's words reminded Chi-Chi that Lin Yi's don't mess around wasn't just for show. Lin Yi knew that she was going to kill him. The story of Mr. Dongwu that he told later proved this point. He was insinuating that he was ungrateful. Who was this person? Chi-Chi's heart skipped a beat. He could tell that she was going to harm him with his back turned, and yet he didn't react at all. Was he fearless? Or in that case, the purpose of this person's treatment of his injuries was questionable. Chi-Chi felt a chill in her heart and made up her mind. The dagger in her hand sped up, going for Lin Yi's neck without hesitation. Lin Yi didn't think that this assassin wasn't done yet. Was she trying to bully him with both hands? Lin Yi frowned and turned his head, dodging Chi-Chi's dagger. He opened his mouth and bit down on the dagger, as well as Chi-Chi's fingers. Ah! Chi-Chi's hand was in pain, and the dagger flew out of her hand. Her body hadn't recovered yet, and it was only through sheer willpower that she was able to stand up and walk behind Lin Yi. After the dagger left her hand, Chi-Chi collapsed onto the floor, panting heavily. The wound on her leg seemed to have been aggravated as well, and cold sweat dripped down Chi-Chi's forehead. Lin Yi spat the dagger to the side and continued brewing the medicine. You really are an ungrateful person. But it's fine. A good man doesn't fight with a woman. Leave now, or I'll kill you after I finish brewing the medicine. Chi-Chi understood now that Lin Yi wasn't a normal person. How could a normal person dodge her sneak attack? Could a normal person bite down on a dagger? Chi-Chi, on the other hand, understood from Lin Yi's words he wasn't making the medicine for her. She was the one who thought too highly of herself. Chi-Chi's eyes were filled with humiliation and unwillingness. She wasn't an impulsive person, and as an assassin, she couldn't be impulsive either. Impulsive assassins would be killed first, and wouldn't be able to live until now. Since Lin Yi could easily take her dagger away with both his hands occupied, Chi-Chi gave up on the idea of fighting again. She wasn't a match for Lin Yi. Even when she wasn't injured, she couldn't guarantee that she'd be able to handle this man. There wasn't any killing intent on this man, not even a hint, but the feeling she got from him was unfathomable. He was truly unfathomable. In the organization, he would only have this kind of feeling when he was facing his own father. Chi-Chi silently picked up her leather pants from the floor. There was blood inside, but it was already dried. Other than being a little uncomfortable, it didn't affect her appearance. The problem was that there weren't any other clothes in the room. "Don't forget to close the door when you leave," Linny said as if he had eyes on the back of his head. Chi-Chi left the room and slammed the door shut. I'm sorry, this man saved my life, and I'm not a match for him right now. But don't worry, I'll remember him, and one day I'll kill him with my own hands, because I'm only your Shao-Chi. Chi-Chi swore in her heart. In actuality, Chi-Chi wasn't called Young Chi-Chi at first. Chi was just a code in the Assassin's graduation training group. She was the youngest, so naturally, she was the 7th. The other members of the group were named by numbers as well. On the other hand, Shield Bro Lin, who was brewing medicine in the room, didn't know that his good intentions were being remembered by others. Achoo! Linny sneezed. It wasn't like he hadn't smelled the medicine before. Why was he sneezing now? This was the second sneeze today. Linny sniffled. Did he really have a cold? Chapter 82. It was too cruel. Chi-Chi's wound had stopped bleeding, but her body wasn't healed yet. Her face was still pale, and she was limping. Even so, she didn't want to stay in the room. Since she couldn't kill Linny, she'd just leave and come back when she had the chance. That was the rule of an assassin. If she couldn't win, then she wasn't an assassin. She was a Suicide Squad member. Limping down to the first floor, Chi-Chi went to the bar. "Boss, what's the name of the man who brought me to room 209? Chi-Chi didn't ask Lin Yi's name, because she knew that Lin Yi wouldn't answer even if she did. Lin Yi treated her like a passerby, and she was trying to kill him. Lin Yi wouldn't go looking for trouble. But Chi-Chi wasn't an idiot. She knew that she had to register when staying at the hotel. She'd been unconscious at the time, and she didn't have any identification on her. It had to be Lin Yi. Oh. The boss paused, but came out immediately after seeing Chi-Chi's attire. She was the woman on the back of the man who'd rushed to get a room. It couldn't be, right? They didn't know each other, and they'd gotten together, getting a room? But looking at her, she'd been carried. Was she drunk? If that was the case, then it was possible. Young men and women these days. The boss sighed at the degeneracy of the world, but she didn't think that her hotel would still be doing so well if it weren't for these young men and women coming to get a room. "His name is Lin Yi," the boss said as she looked at the registration book. "Thanks." Chi-Chi nodded, committing the name to memory. Lin Yi. Huh? She didn't know if it was a real name or a fake one, but whatever it was, Chi-Chi hated the name. "You're welcome." For the boss, it was nothing more than a matter of lifting a finger. Chi-Chi memorized Lin Yi's name before turning to leave the hotel. The boss couldn't help but click her tongue as she limped out of the hotel. It couldn't be, right? That much? Can't even walk? That man just now didn't look very powerful, but he was actually so powerful? Could this be the girl's first time? The lady boss shook her head and thought evilly in her heart. To Lin Yi, Chi-Chi's incident was nothing more than a small interlude. Lin Yi wasn't too happy about the fact that Chi-Chi had stabbed him. He'd saved her life after all, and although he'd only seen her thigh, how was he supposed to treat it if he didn't? According to her, if she were to kill someone for looking at her thighs, she wouldn't be able to see the nurse today. Should he also take a knife and kill that auntie? Although the firepower of the alcohol stove was not as strong as that of the gas stove, it could still be used if it was controlled well. The decocted decoctions were placed into sealed bags bought from the pharmacy. Because the decoctions were hot, there was naturally steam. When the decoctions cooled down, the steam would turn into water, and the seal bags would become a vacuum. This was good for preservation, and the decoctions would not deteriorate. After everything was done, Lin Yi put away the medicine brewing equipment. He could still use these next time. The alcohol was pretty much all gone, but these things were sold everywhere. He didn't think he'd left anything behind, So he called the reception downstairs and told her to check out. But when Lin Yi's eyes landed on the bed, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. It seemed that he'd have to pay for it. There were blood stains all over the bedsheets, evidently. It didn't take long for the owner to saunter into the room. It seemed that this hotel usually didn't have any attendants, and she was the only one running the place. Linny had opened the window before the owner came up, letting in some fresh air. The smell of the medicine wasn't that strong, and the owner didn't notice it at all. She was stunned by the blood on the bed the moment she stepped into the room. Lin Yi's eyes widened as he stared at the blood on the bed. You, this bedsheet? The owner pointed at the bedsheet in the room, shocked. She couldn't speak. She was too shocked, too shocked. She'd been thinking that it was Chi-Chi's first time, and that was why she was limping. Now that she saw the blood stains on the bedsheets, it only confirmed her evil thoughts. But, at the same time, she thought that Lin Yi didn't know how to be gentle with the fair sex either. It was his first time, and he was already in such a terrible state. Was he trying to kill her? Was he trying to kill her? If someone were to die in her hotel, she'd be in deep trouble. At that thought, the owner's face darkened. This bedsheet was at least 10 kwai, and with the money she made for the room, she didn't have much left after the bedsheet. What did you do to the room? The owner asked coldly. I'm sorry, I'll pay you for it. Lin Yi didn't know how to explain, so he just told the owner that he'd pay the full price. Since Lin Yi was willing to pay, naturally, the owner didn't say anything else. She thought that this kid was quite smart, or she'd have been waiting to insult him. After checking the room, the owner said, 1 disposable towel, 40 kwai. 1 bedsheet, 60 kwai. 100 kwai in total. All right, Lin Yi nodded. This owner wasn't too unscrupulous. This kind of white bedsheet cost 30 kwai in bulk. She sold it to me for 60 kwai, which was the same price as the towel. It was just double the price. The owner saw that Lin Yi was straightforward, so she didn't say anything else. Then, you come downstairs with me. Let's calculate the room fee. You've rested in the room for 5 hours, so I'll have to charge you according to the standard for a day. It's 60 kwai. You paid me another 60 kwai. Lin Yi nodded. After he went downstairs, he took out the money and gave it to the owner. Then, he turned around and prepared to leave. Wait, the owner stopped Lin Yi. Is there anything else? Lin Yi turned around and asked. He wondered if the owner felt that it wasn't worth it and wanted to extort him again. The girl you brought just now asked for your name before she left. I told her. The owner saw that Lin Yi was so straightforward, so she kindly reminded him. Based on her intuition, the two of them definitely wouldn't be a couple, so the owner said a few more words. Lin Yi smiled bitterly. He didn't want to have any contact with the female assassin anymore, but he didn't expect that the female assassin actually remembered his name when she left. Probably, there would be trouble in the future. After leaving the hotel, Lin Yi looked at the time. It was already 2:00 in the afternoon. He hadn't had lunch yet, but for Lin Yi, a meal wasn't very important. Chapter 83. The Big Four. The school was still quiet when he got to the school. Classes hadn't ended yet. Lin Yi walked up to Class 5's classroom and peeked in through the window. It was a self-study class, with no teacher present. Lin Yi pushed the door open and walked in. A lot of people raised their heads to look at Lin Yi before going back to their own stuff. The 12th grade was a very tight class, after all, and nobody liked to stick their noses into other people's business. Yushu poked Ming Yao with a finger. Yao Yao, Shield Bro's here. So what if he's here? What does that have to do with me? Ming Yao frowned, dissatisfied with Yushu's actions. Shu, why do you pay so much attention to him? You're not really into him, are you? I'd see a living person walking into the classroom if I raised my head. Yushu shrugged. I won't talk about it anymore since it has nothing to do with you. Ming Yao opened her mouth, but didn't say anything. She just shook her head and went back to reading the notes in her hands. Yushu smiled faintly at Meng Yao's reaction before going back to her own stuff. Shu, what do you think about this Lenny guy? He went to change his bandages early in the morning. Why's he only here in the afternoon? Don't tell me he's hooking up with Lingshan again? Meng Yao turned around suddenly. I thought you didn't pay attention to him anymore? Yushu smiled at Meng Yao. He is my father's shield. He is not honest with me. He goes out and messes around. Of course, I am not happy. Mingyao didn't know why she was suspecting Linny, but she found a good reason. Linny was hired by her dad, and he had to be worth the money. Then go talk to him and tell him not to be a playboy. He can only be a shield for you. Yu Shu suggested casually. What do you mean by me? Meng Yao's face turned red. Shu, your words are so evil, so ambiguous. It was originally you alone. It was your daddy who hired him, not my daddy. Yu Shu said matter-of-factly. If you don't think that's a good idea, then let him be my shield. I might not need him in high school, but I might need him in college. Screw you. You already have your brother. Why do you still need a shield? Meng Yao said with a smile, feeling a little uncomfortable inside, especially since Yu Shu felt like she'd stolen something from her. Pin Liang shrunk his neck subconsciously when Lin Yi entered the classroom. He'd been scolded by his father and told to behave himself. As far as he was concerned, it was all Lin Yi's fault. However, he also knew that he was not Lin Yi's opponent barehanded. Even Heibao Bro with a gun wouldn't be a match for Lin Yi, let alone barehanded. The kid was too strong. And so, Pin Liang knew that he couldn't use the usual methods for revenge. He was waiting for an opportunity, a chance to teach Lin Yi a lesson. As for Kong Xiaobo, Pin Liang thought about it carefully after going back yesterday. Since Lin Yi was so protective of him, he might as well let the kid go. It wouldn't be worth it if he got beaten up by Lin Yi later. Hey boss, you're finally here. Kong Xiaobo was very excited to see Lin Yi. He waved at Lin Yi as soon as he entered the classroom. What are you doing, sitting there and waving? Do you think you're the president? Lin Yi smiled as he kicked Kong Xiaobo's leg and sat in his seat. Boss, you don't know, but Pin Liang was very low-key today. You didn't come and he didn't cause any trouble for me. Kong Xiaobo said. Isn't that good? Lin Yi said. Is there anything going on today? No, it's just yesterday. The school made a simple announcement, saying that outsiders came to cause trouble and were arrested by the police. Kong Xiaobo said. Fuck. It's just that Pin Liang's family has connections, and the school is protecting him. Everyone knows that it was Pin Liang who hired those people. Heh. Lin Yi heard from Faubert that Pin Liang's uncle was a director of Pengzhan Industries, so naturally, he was one of the shareholders of the school. It was normal for the school to protect Pin Liang. Right, boss? Guess how everyone is describing you now? Kong Xiaobo lowered his voice and said excitedly. Describing me? Describe what? Lin Yi didn't know what was going on. Boss, you are now one of the big four in the school. You have replaced Pin Liang and successfully become the third of the big four. Kong Xiaobo said as if it was something to be proud of. Big four? Lin Yi felt a chill. When did he become one of the big four? He had always been low-key, and didn't even dare to do well in exams. How did he become famous? Moreover, looking at Kong Xiaobo, it was as if being one of the big four was a glorious thing. It made Lin Yi speechless. Yeah, boss, if you beat the big four again, then you will become the big four's big four. Kong Xiaobo added. Big four? Lin Yi was speechless. The big four's big four. That was even worse than the third. But Lin Yi couldn't do anything about it. After all, the fight with the outsiders yesterday was a fact. Heibao might have come to the school to cause trouble, but other people wouldn't think that way. They would think that he was the kind of student who liked to fight and beat up Pin Liang's people. Naturally, he could become one of the big four. The class bell rang, interrupting Lin Yi and Xiaobo's conversation. Lin Yi wasn't too interested in the big four's name, but he couldn't do anything about it since it was Xiaobo's mouth that belonged to Xiaobo. But after thinking about it, Lin Yi felt that this was his image anyways. It would be easier for him to be Meng Yao's shield in the future. He just needed to stand there and people would think, who dares mess with me? And I'm a tyrant. The last class on Friday was physical activity class. Physical activity class was a class where students could go outside or stay in the classroom to study. It was the only class of the 12th grade that allowed them to relax every week. Even the students who were working hard would choose to relax during this class. They would take a stroll around the school, or stroll around the music store, snack street, or accessory store in front of the school gate. Chapter 84. You go after them. Lin Yi wasn't worried about Pin Liang's actions at all. Pinliang might be a little hard to deal with in school, but he wouldn't do anything out of line. Mingyao had Yushu by her side, and Mengyao's family background wasn't something Pinliang could do as he pleased. Even if his uncle was a shareholder of Pengzhan Industries, Pengzhan wouldn't let him off the hook that easily if he tried to force himself on Mingyao in public, even if his uncle was a shareholder of Pengzhan Industries. As a result, Lin Yi didn't plan on following Mingyao and Yushu. Even if Lin Yi had wanted to, Mingyao's personality wouldn't have allowed him to tag along. Lin Yi might as well focus on his own things instead. Boss, want to go eat some barbecue at the food street in front of the school? Kong Xiaobo had a date with Lin Yi last night, so he wanted to grab a drink or two with Lin Yi during physical exercise class. He'd been in high school for 3 years, and he'd lived to the age of 18. He'd only felt like a real man these few days. Sure, Lin Yi said happily. He hadn't eaten anything in the afternoon. Lin Yi placed the things he'd brought back from the hotel in his desk, placing a few books on the outside to prevent them from falling out. Only then was he able to leave with peace of mind. Most of the students had already left the classroom by the time the two left. There were only a few nerds left in the classroom. You couldn't count on these nerds to go out and play. These people spent all their waking hours in books. Kong Xiaobo slowed down subconsciously as they passed by 12th grade class 9. Lin Yi was curious about his actions, but Kong Xiaobo tugged at Lin Yi excitedly just as he was about to ask him about it. Tang Yun. Lin Yi was taken aback. He subconsciously looked forward and saw a girl walking out of grade 12 class 9's classroom not far away. After the girl walked out of the classroom, she also walked towards the staircase. Lin Yi did not see her clearly. By the time Kong Xiaobo called out, it was already too late. Lin Yi only caught a glimpse of the girl's side profile, followed by a ponytail. The girl was wearing a school uniform. She was very tall, but because the uniform was a little loose, he couldn't see her exact figure. However, since she was called the school belle, she couldn't be bad. It was just a glimpse, but she gave off the feeling of a beautiful girl in a romance game. She had a strong academic vibe. She was indeed a popular commoner beauty. How is it? Kong Xiaobo danced with joy. He was very excited as if he had won the lottery. I didn't see it clearly. What can you tell from the back? Lin Yi patted Kong Xiaobo. Why are you so excited? She's not your girlfriend. Heh, of course not. But to be able to see her from afar is already very exciting. Boss, don't you think it's fate? Kong Xiaobo was still very energetic. You see Chu Mingyao and Yushu every day. Then why don't you have epilepsy? Lin Yi found it a little funny. Looking at him now, he really looked like he was having epilepsy. Isn't that different? Chu Mingyao and Yushu. I don't have any thoughts about them at all. They won't fall for me. I don't have talent, and I don't have money. Why would the miss like me? But Tang Yun is different. She's close to us. She's from a normal family. At least I have some thoughts about her, Kong Xiaobo said. Huh. Lin Yi smiled. But he couldn't deny that Kong Xiaobo's thinking was right. Chu Mingyao and Yushu drove a Bentley to and from school. They lived in a villa. If they didn't have a certain background, they wouldn't dare to make a move. Boss, why don't you go after her? You're in the limelight right now. You're famous in the whole school. I believe Tang Yun has heard of your name. Kong Xiaobo suddenly suggested. Huh. Lin Yi paused. Isn't she your dream girl? Heh, not only mine. She's the dream girl of many boys in the school, Xiaobo said with a chuckle. But dream lovers are meant for dreamings. I know my limits. You think I'd win 5 million? It's possible. Lin Yi nodded. Maybe you could ask me for some advice when you're buying the lottery, who knows? Maybe you'll really win 5 million when my jade comes into play. Fuck. Kong Xiaobo was speechless. He rolled his eyes. I think the chance of Tang Yun liking me is lower than me winning 5 million. Now you know, right? I'm just imagining things. But I think you have a chance. Come on. Why don't you say Zhong Pingliang has a better chance? He used to be one of the big 4. Why didn't I see him getting her? Lin Yi shook his head. He didn't want any scandals. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to explain it to Chu Mingyao. Do you know where I'm taking you? Kong Xiaobo said mysteriously. Where to? Aren't we going to eat barbecue? Lin Yi asked. Yes, but do you know who's selling the barbecue? Xiaobo winked at Lin Yi. You're not going to tell me that Tang Yun sells it, are you? Lin Yi didn't know whether to laugh or cry at Kong Xiaobo's mysteriousness. Bingo! Kong Xiaobo clapped his hands. It's Tang Yun's mom. Tang Yun's mom? Lin Yi froze. Ugh, not that motherf asterisk cur. I mean Tang Yun's mother's. Xiaobo coughed, realizing that his mother's name didn't sound good. It's her mom's barbecue stand. Lin Yi didn't know what to say. Boss, I'm telling you, Tang Yun usually helps her mom with the barbecue stall when she's in class. If we go eat barbecue now, we might be able to see Tang Yun. Kong Xiaobo pulled Lin Yi and quickened his pace. Let's go. We'll follow Tang Yun. Following Kong Xiaobo's actions, Lin Yi felt that his heart had become younger again. It was filled with energy. These few years, he was either assassinating or carrying out dangerous missions. He spent most of his time in a rain of bullets. It was rare for him to relax like this. It was only at this moment that Lin Yi realized that this was what he should be doing at his age, wasn't it? As Kong Xiaobo pulled him to follow the school beauty, Lin Yi felt a sense of excitement in his heart. Following the school beauty was something many boys of his age did. Chapter 85. Established facts. If even Kong Xiaobo knew about it, Zhou Ruoming naturally knew about it as well. After the third period, he brought a group of men to the food street outside of the school. He ordered some skewers and beer and waited for Tang Yun's mother's barbecue stall. Tang Yun's mother, naturally, knew about Zhou Ruoming. She knew that he was the bully of the school, but he didn't usually come to her stall. She didn't know what was up with him today, bringing so many people with him. Mrs. Tang was still a bit afraid of Zhou Ruoming. There used to be a seafood stall on the food street that got a stomachache from Zhou Ruoming, and the next day, Zhou Ruoming and his men smashed up the stall. Not only that, but the stall owner was beaten black and blue and couldn't come back for a couple of days. The other vendors on the food street were naturally wary of Zhou Ruoming's tyranny. They all tried to find out who he was and found out that he was one of the big four. From then on, Zhou Ruoming's stall was as careful as they could be, afraid that something would go wrong. They'd even give a small discount when they calculated the bill, afraid that Zhou Ruoming wouldn't be happy about it. Mrs. Tang wasn't the only one selling barbecue on the food street. Zhou Ruoming and the others used to eat at a barbecue stall at the front of the street, to which Mrs. Tang secretly rejoiced. A small business like this didn't make much money, and if something went wrong, she'd have to pay for it. Young brothers, please enjoy your meal. Mrs. Tang carefully placed the chicken wings on Zhou Ruoming's table, but the more careful she was, the more mistakes she made. Mrs. Tang's hand shook when she put the chicken wings down, and the seasoning on the chicken wings fell onto the leg of a fat guy next to Zhou Ruoming, leaving a greasy stain. Sorry. Mrs. Tang was at a loss as to what to do. She was terrified of these young masters, afraid that they'd get up and smash the stall if they didn't like what they were doing. How about, I help you wipe it? I can help you wash it too. Ever since Mrs. Tang had been laid off, she had been relying on the barbecue stand to support the family. Her lover had been bedridden due to a leg injury, but the compensation from the factory had never been paid. She had tried a few times, but the factory's leaders had rudely kicked her out. Mrs. Tang was a typical housewife who lived at the bottom of society. She was humble and weak, but she had no choice but to rely on her own two hands to support the family. She earned money to pay for her daughter's education and her lover's medical bills. It's nothing. The fierce-faced fat man wasn't angry at all. He casually pulled the seasoning off his pants and said nonchalantly, How would I dare to trouble Annie to wash my pants? Mingji will kill me. You'll be my elder in the future. You brat. Zhou Ruoming poked the fat man's head. You're already sucking up? Heh. The fat man laughed, and the other students who came with Zhou Ruoming also laughed without restraint. Mrs. Tang looked at the fat man in front of her helplessly. She didn't know what he was talking about, nor did she know what these people were laughing about. The only thing she understood was that the fat man didn't seem to want to hold her responsible. Mrs. Tang let out a sigh of relief and said carefully, Then, I'll pay for this meal? How can I do that? Do you think our Mingji is someone who doesn't pay for his meals? The fat man waved his hand. Even if I don't pay for other people's meals, I still have to pay for yours. Plus, we're all family now. We can't be short of money. Zhou Ruoming heard the fat man's words and smiled proudly. This fat man was quite eye-catching. It seemed like he wasn't being nice to him for nothing. Mrs. Tang was getting more and more confused. She didn't know what the fat man was talking about. What did he mean by family doesn't lack money? What did he mean? At that moment, Tang Yun walked over from afar. The fat man didn't care about pleasing Mrs. Tang anymore. He suddenly stood up and shook his fat body, waving his hands and whistling. Zhou Ruoming's lackeys also whistled and winked at Tang Yun. "Sister-in-law is here. Sister-in-law is here," the fat man shouted. Tang Yun's face paled when she saw Zhou Ruoming and his lackeys, as well as the fatty's nonsense. She didn't think that Zhou Ruoming would be able to find his way here, not to mention spouting nonsense in front of her mother. When Zhou Ruoming wrote a love letter to Tang Yun rejected him mercilessly. However, Zhou Ruoming didn't seem to care at all. He kept pestering Tang Yun with a cheeky face until the bell rang. Tang Yun ran back to the classroom as if she was escaping. There were no movements for the past 2 days. Tang Yun thought that Zhou Ruoming had given up after being rejected. She didn't expect him to do something like this. How sad would her mother be if she thought that she was dating at school? Tang Yun stopped and didn't dare to move forward. Zhou Ruoming's passionate gaze made Tang Yun lower her head in fear. She blushed, embarrassed. "Boss, Zhou Ruoming's group is in front of us." Kang Xiaobo and Lin Yi followed behind Tang Yun. They saw Zhou Ruoming and his lackeys teasing Tang Yun. Kang Xiaobo was furious. This guy is bullying Tang Yun. Oh, so his name is Zhou Ruoming? Lin Yi paused. He recognized the man who was leading the group. It was the guy who got hit by a basketball a few days ago. "You know him?" Kang Xiaobo heard Lin Yi's words and paused. "He is one of the 4 big bullies. I was talking about him before. If you let him go, you are a bully." Lin Yi shook his head and smiled bitterly. It seemed like he had done it a few days ago. "I heard that Zhou Ruoming was rejected by Tang Yun. I didn't think that he would use such a despicable method. He made it a fact in front of Tang Yun's mother." Kang Xiaobo heard what the fatty was shouting and clenched his fist. Lin Yi, on the other hand, didn't think much of it. This Zhou Ruoming was a jerk, but he hadn't done anything to Lin Yi. There was no conflict of interest between them, and Lin Yi couldn't be bothered to get involved. "Sister-in-law, sit down. Ming Bro has ordered the dishes. You are the only one left." The fatty winked at Tang Yun. He wanted to squeeze his eyeballs out. Chapter 86. Chapter 86, Thirdsman Misses. Tang didn't understand what they were talking about before, but when she saw Tang Yun and heard how they called Tang Yun, Mrs. Tang immediately understood what was going on. Mrs. Tang's heart sank. Was her daughter really in love? But looking at her daughter's pale face, she didn't know if it was because she was afraid that she'd find out, or if it was because Zhou Ruoming was forcing her to be his girlfriend. But no matter what, other than sadness, Mrs. Tang couldn't think of anything else. A young master like Zhou Ruoming wasn't someone she could mess with, and she knew that her words wouldn't change anything. Mrs. Tang had seen too much of the fickleness of human nature over the years. She knew how little she could do by herself. Take the electronics factory where her lover used to work, for example. A machine had damaged his sciatic nerves, and he was now paralyzed in bed. He couldn't take care of himself, and yet he didn't get a single cent of compensation from the factory. He was the boss of a small electronics factory, and because of his social connections, Mrs. Tang couldn't even call for help. The contract had been tampered with, and there wasn't even a place for her to sue. Just because she went to the factory to ask for medical fees, the boss threatened to cause trouble for her family. He said that he'd find someone to harm her daughter and burn down their house. Mrs. Tang had no choice but to give up. She was the weak one, after all. The entire family's livelihood fell on Mrs. Tang's shoulders. Fortunately, her daughter was a good student. Last semester, she got first place in the school year. Not only was her tuition free, but she also received a scholarship. This made life a little easier for the family. Mrs. Tang froze when she heard that her daughter had a boyfriend. She was angry at her daughter, but at the same time, she wondered if Zhou Ruoming was the one who forced her daughter into this relationship. But it would be fine if he really liked Tang Yin, since Zhou Ruoming's family background wasn't bad. Her daughter wouldn't lose anything if she was with him. She was just worried that he was just messing around with her, and that he'd dump her once he got bored. Mrs. Tang didn't know what the rich young masters' lives were like, but she'd heard about it from others. Tang Yin blushed. She wanted to argue, but Zhou Ruoming's reputation and all the rumors in the school made her a little timid. Rumor had it that Zhou Ruoming had once secretly dragged a girl to the outdoor toilet and raped her. After that incident, he paid the girl a sum of money and helped her transfer to another school. Although it was only hearsay, it was true that the girl had transferred to another school. It was just that the girl's family had benefited from this matter, so they naturally wouldn't make a fuss about it. Tang Yin was afraid that if she really pissed off Zhou Ruoming, he'd do anything. Although she wouldn't be like that girl who would remain silent after receiving the money and demand an explanation. But what was the use of an explanation? Tang Yin lowered her head in silence, tears welling up in her eyes. She hated her mother for not chasing Zhou Ruoming away. However, on second thought, her mother was also in a vulnerable position. She might even be more helpless. What's so good about being the campus belle? Why was he so unlucky? She'd always kept a low profile, never putting on makeup, and never wearing anything other than her school uniform. Yet, she still attracted attention. Mengyao and Yushu were also the campus belle, but would Zhou Ruoming dare to do this to them? That bunch of trash. Kang Xiaobo had been acting like a real man these 2 days. He couldn't hold it in anymore after seeing Tang Yin getting bullied by Zhou Ruoming. He clenched his fists and charged over. Linny didn't think that Kang Xiaobo would stick his nose into this. He didn't know that even a timid boy like Kang Xiaobo would explode for the goddess of his heart. This day, what a troublesome day. Linny wanted to keep a low profile for a few days, but now he couldn't. Xiaobo was already there. How could he just let it go? Was he supposed to watch Zhou Ruoming beat up Kang Xiaobo? Zhou Ruoming, are you still a man? You can't win Tang Yin's heart, so you resort to such despicable methods to force me to submit. Kang Xiaobo charged over and stood in front of Tang Yin. Zhou Ruoming was waiting for Tang Yin to make a decision. This was the effect he wanted. He wanted to force Tang Yin to make a choice. He came here to make a gesture, and that was a threat. Since he stood in front of Mrs. Tang's barbecue stall, he was telling Tang Yin that if she didn't agree today, neither she nor her mother would stop. Her mother's barbecue stall wouldn't be able to run anymore. And so, Ruoming was 50% sure that Tang Yin would say yes, even if she had no choice but to be his girlfriend. Tang Yin kept her head down and didn't say a word because she was worried about her safety, but she was also worried about her mother's barbecue stall. She knew that if she turned against Zhou Ruoming today, her mother's barbecue stall wouldn't be able to sell anymore. If Zhou Ruoming and his followers came to cause trouble every day, her family's livelihood would be cut off. Just when Tang Yin was at a loss of what to do, Kang Xiaobo suddenly charged over. Not only did Zhou Ruoming freeze, but Tang Yin also froze. Who was this person? She didn't know him? Who the F***ck are you? Zhou Ruoming saw that Tang Yin was about to be forced to make a choice, but someone suddenly appeared out of nowhere. He was furious and pointed at Kang Xiaobo, his voice darkening. I. Kang Xiaobo looked at Zhou Ruoming's fierce eyes and lost his courage. He was just going to explode for a moment, and it would be over after that. He wasn't as strong as Lin Yi, and in terms of fighting, he wasn't Zhou Ruoming's opponent. He was discouraged by Zhou Ruoming's question, but he knew that he couldn't back down now. Boss was still behind him, and if he got beaten up, how could he not help? He straightened his neck and said, I am the third of the Big Four's underling. Big Fours? Third? Underling? Zhou Ruoming froze, confused by Kang Xiaobo's words. What nonsense are you talking about? You're Zhong Pingliang's underling? King beat Zhong Pingliang up, and you still won't behave? How dare you butt into my business? F***ck off. Your boss doesn't even dare to butt into Ming Bro's business. Who the F***ck are you? Fatty pushed Kang Xiaobo hard. Go home and tell your boss that I'll F***c his mother. Fatty obviously thought that Kang Xiaobo was Zhong Pingliang's underling, and so he was very unrestrained. News of Zhong Pingliang getting beaten up by a transfer student had spread, and Heibao Bro was arrested as well. He might be sentenced to a few years in prison, so Zhong Pingliang had lost his backing and face. Naturally, Zhou Ruoming's underling wouldn't give him face. Chapter 87. You haven't paid yet. Lin Yi didn't know who his mother was since he was young, But Lin Yi wasn't going to let him off the hook that easily. Lin Yi was already brooding over the fact that he was an orphan, and now this guy was dragging his mother into it. Slap. Lin Yi slapped the fatty's face, sending him flying. With Lin Yi's strength, the fatty spun a few times on the ground like a spinning top before falling headfirst onto the ground. The left side of the fatty's face was clearly visible, and the fatty's face looked even more ferocious now. Whose mother are you trying to F***CK? Lin Yi said coldly as he looked at the fatty wailing on the ground. Who the F***CK are you? How dare you hit one of my men? Zhou Ruoming hadn't seen Lin Yi's face clearly, since Lin Yi's back was facing him. Lin Yi's slap was a little scary, but Zhou Ruoming didn't think much about it. After all, it was when the fatty wasn't paying attention. He subconsciously thought that the newcomer was one of Lin Yi's men, and reached out to push Lin Yi. Is your face healed? Lin Yi turned to look at Zhou Ruoming. Lin Yi? Zhou Ruoming finally recognized the man in front of him. He finally understood why he was able to send the fierce-faced fatty flying with a single slap. I'm asking you a question. Is your face healed? Lin Yi said as he looked at Zhou Ruoming. Yes, it's healed, Zhou Ruoming said, a little scared. This Lin Yi was a fucking maniac. Even Heibao Bro was crying for his mom and dad after beating him up. How could Zhou Ruoming afford to piss him off? As for Lin Yi, he was obviously asking if he was alright after being hit by the basketball that day. Oh. Lin Yi nodded and slapped Zhou Ruoming's face. Zhou Ruoming's nose was bleeding and half of his face was swollen. However, Lin Yi didn't slap him away like before. You're screwed again. Scram. Zhou Ruoming covered his face. He felt so wronged in his heart. What was this? He was just flirting with a girl, and he actually met this devil. Moreover, he didn't seem to have provoked him, did he? Wasn't it just the fierce-looking fatty saying, fuck your mother? But that wasn't to scold Lin Yi. In this day and age, who would take the initiative to be scolded? However, the situation was pressing. Zhou Ruoming had no choice but to retreat. He didn't have the courage to fight Lin Yi. He turned around and glared at Kang Xiaobo, thinking that it was this kid's fault. However, when Zhou Ruoming saw Kang Xiaobo's proud smile, he froze. He remembered what Kang Xiaobo said earlier. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be that the third of the big four that Kang Xiaobo mentioned was Lin Yi? Yes, there was a rumor in the school that Lin Yi had replaced Pinliang as the third of the big four. Fuck. Ruoming was quite troubled. Couldn't you at least explain it to him? If you said that you were Lin Yi's subordinate, why would I argue with you? I'll just turn around and leave. However, that was what Zhou Ruoming was thinking. If Kang Xiaobo had said that he was Lin Yi's subordinate, Zhou Ruoming might not have believed him. Let's go. Zhou Ruoming called for someone to help Fatty up and left Mrs. Tang's barbecue stand with his tail between his legs. The vendors around Mrs. Tang's barbecue stand looked at Lin Yi in shock. They didn't know who he was. However, they knew who Zhou Ruoming was. They saw Lin Yi hit Zhou Ruoming, but Zhou Ruoming didn't even dare let out a fart. They looked at Lin Yi with respect. This was a character that was stronger than Zhou Ruoming. Tangyun, are you okay? Kang Xiaobo was close to the goddess of his heart for the first time. Although he knew that it was impossible for him and Tangyun to be together, it was good to be able to talk to her. Now that there was a chance, Kang Xiaobo didn't want to let it go. However, because of his nervousness, Kang Xiaobo was stuttering when he spoke. Tangyun frowned slightly. She had heard about the new Big Four's third brother, Lin Yi. She saw that the boy from before was Lin Yi, and that this Kang Xiaobo was his subordinate. She was naturally on guard. News of Lin Yi's exploits had spread. He'd taught Pinliang a lesson as soon as he'd transferred, and now he'd slapped Zhou Ruoming in the face. Tang Yin was a little afraid of him now, thinking that he might be up to no good, that he'd slapped Zhou Ruoming to get on her good side. As for Kang Xiaobo, Tang Yun already saw him as Lin Yi's lackey. She didn't have a good impression of him. She heard his question and replied faintly, I'm fine. She then quickly ran to Mrs. Tang's side. Mom? Mrs. Tang understood that Zhou Ruoming was bothering her daughter. She was happy, but also afraid of Zhou Ruoming's revenge. However, seeing that Lin Yi was able to deal with Zhou Ruoming made her heart flutter. Whether it was looks or temperament, Lin Yi was much better than Zhou Ruoming. It wouldn't be bad if he became her daughter's boyfriend. At least she wouldn't have to worry about Zhou Ruoming. However, Mrs. Tang was just thinking about it. She didn't want her daughter to be wronged. Xiaobo could tell that Tang Yun didn't like talking to him, and he was a little discouraged. But he understood the difference between them, and it was basically impossible for them to get together. He didn't think too much about it. Auntie, 20 mutton skewers, 2 lamb chops, 2 chicken neck skewers, 2 tofu rolls, and 2 bottles of beer. Kong Xiaobo quickly adjusted his position and became happy again. Although he didn't get Tang Yun's favor, at least he could hold his head high in front of Zhou Ruoming. What are you guys so arrogant for? In front of my boss, aren't you guys just getting slapped in the face? Okay. Mrs. Tang nodded. These two were even stronger than Zhou Ruoming. After all, she had to take care of them. Zhou Ruoming, wait. Lin Yi suddenly called out to Zhou Ruoming. Zhou Ruoming was startled by Lin Yi's voice. He didn't know what Lin Yi wanted. Didn't he tell him to leave? Why did he call him back? Although he didn't want to go back, he had to go back. He could run, but he couldn't run away. If Lin Yi came looking for trouble, he wouldn't be able to handle it. Lin Yi, is there anything else? Zhou Ruoming turned around with a bitter face. You haven't paid yet, Lin Yi said faintly. In fact, Lin Yi felt that Mrs. Tang was pitiful. It wasn't easy for her to support the barbecue stall alone. He wanted to help if he could. Chapter 88. Let you pretend, here's 100 kwai. Keep the change. Zhou Ruoming took out 100 kwai note and slapped it in front of Mrs. Tang. He didn't want to stay another minute. Lin Yi was watching him, and it made him feel uncomfortable. That won't do, Mrs. Tang said, looking for change. Ruoming waved his hand with a bitter smile before turning around and leaving without a second glance back. Mrs. Tang had thought that Zhou Ruoming wouldn't be able to get the money back for the meal. They'd ordered 50 to 60 kwai worth of food and drinks, and Mrs. Tang only earned around 100 kwai a day. She'd lost half of it in one go, and while it was a pity, she didn't dare ask Zhou Ruoming for the money. She didn't think that one word from Lin Yi would make Zhou Ruoming pay up like a good boy, and he didn't even need the change. Mrs. Tang couldn't help but feel grateful towards Lin Yi. They were all young masters at school, but why was there such a big difference between them? Look at Lin Yi. He looked like a gentleman, and look at that Zhou Ruoming. The only thing missing was that his face was a bully. But the bully was slapped in the face by a gentleman, and didn't even dare make a sound before running away. The thought made her look at Lin Yi a lot more pleasing to the eye. She looked at Tang Yin, who was still standing there, staring at Lin Yi and Kong Xiaobo, not knowing what she was thinking. Yin, what are you doing? Aren't you going to help your classmates? Tang Yin didn't think that Lin Yi and Kong Xiaobo would be sitting at her barbecue stand, asking for food. As far as she was concerned, Kong Xiaobo jumping out to fight Zhou Ruoming was most likely ordered by Lin Yi. He probably had the same thoughts as Zhou Ruoming, and their target was her. Other than that, Tang Yin didn't know what else could attract the attention of these young masters. Although Lin Yi wasn't as blatant as Zhou Ruoming, and was instead a gentleman, Lin Yi was even more of a hypocrite in Tang Yin's eyes. He was just fighting Zhou Ruoming and Fatty, and now he was sitting there like a good student. Who was he trying to fool? Especially when she saw that her mother seemed to have a good impression of Lin Yi, and even asked her to serve them. Tang Yin was even more annoyed. She only asked for 100 kwai for you. How could you fall for it so easily? Tang Yin was like a little hedgehog. She had been through all these years, and her heart had been locked tightly. Whenever a boy approached her, she would be on guard. But, since her mother had called her, Tang Yin could only agree no matter how unwilling she was. She went to the stand and took 2 bottles of beer and placed them on Lin Yi and Kong Xiaobo's table. She didn't even look at them and returned to Mrs. Tang's side. Wine starter. Kong Xiaobo saw that Tang Yin only took the bottle of beer and didn't pick up the starter, and that Tang Yin was unhappy. He could only smile bitterly and ask carefully, Yin, what's wrong? Can you open the bottle for your classmate? Mrs. Tang didn't know what was going on with Tang Yun. She was fine just a moment ago, but all of a sudden, her face turned cold. She lowered her head like she was wronged when facing Zhou Ruoming. But when facing Lin Yi, she turned on him just because he was a nice guy? If Tang Yi knew what her mother was thinking, she would explode in anger. He was polite and polite. Just now, he had sent the fierce-faced fatty flying with a slap. Was that considered gentlemanly?
It's fine.
Linny smiled. He didn't know what he did to piss off this pretty girl. Linny could see that Tang Yin's attitude wasn't good, but he didn't mind it. He just thought that she was acting like a little girl. With that, Linny picked up the bottle and flicked the cap with his thumb, and the bottle was opened. Xiaobo's bottle followed the same pattern. Only your classmate is easy to talk to. If it was the previous Zhou Ruoming, he would have destroyed the stall. Mrs. Tang looked at her daughter helplessly. You don't want me to do business anymore? Go back to school. I don't need you here anymore. Tang Yin felt wronged after being scolded by her mother. What did she mean by my classmate is easy to talk to? How could he be easy to talk to? How could the Big Four be easy to talk to? Look at how polite he is. Don't you know that he's just putting on an act? Is he trying to chase after your daughter? All right, the tofu rolls are done. Hurry up and send them over. Mrs. Tang said as she handed the tofu rolls to Tang Yun. Oh. Tang Yin took the tofu rolls angrily and slowly walked over to Lin Yi. The more she looked at Lin Yi's calm face, the more irritated she felt. When she reached Lin Yi's side, Tang Yin didn't know where the courage came from, but she pretended to step on Lin Yi's foot carelessly. Humph! Aren't you pretending to be polite? You want to please my mother? No way, I won't let you. If you want to pretend to be polite in front of me, then fine. I'll stomp you to death and see if you'll get mad. Linny was a bit surprised to be stepped on by Tang Yin out of nowhere. He raised his head and looked at Tang Yin, who had a dark expression on her face. Although the force wasn't really painful to Linny should at least defend himself after being stepped on for no reason, right? Linny was just about to open his mouth when Tang Yin's heart jumped a little. She thought to herself, I told you to pretend. Just pretend. I'll treat you like this if you pretend again in the future. She smiled apologetically. Sorry, I accidentally stepped on you. Oh, it's nothing. Linny saw that Tang Yin had already admitted her mistake and couldn't say anything else. He smiled bitterly and shook his head. However, after Tang Yin apologized, she didn't move her foot away immediately. Instead, she stepped on him a few more times before moving her foot away. Her eyes flashed with a sly smile as she put down the tofu roll and ran away quickly. Linny was speechless. Tang Yin was doing it on purpose. These girls. Linny didn't know what to say. Did he look like someone who could be bullied so easily? It was Yushu and Mengyao before, but Yushu was smart and had something on him, so he let it go. Mengyao's father was his employer, so Linny couldn't say anything. But Tang Yin was taking the initiative to step on him. Forget it. He couldn't be bothered to argue with her. If this got out, he'd be a laughing stock. The Great Eagle was being bullied by a few women. Boss, Tang Yin seems to have something against you? Did you piss her off? Kong Xiaobo also noticed that something was wrong. Tang Yin seemed to be targeting Lin Yi. How would I know? This is the first time I've seen her. Lin Yi shook his head. Chapter 89. What the hell? She's not the prettiest I've ever seen, but she's definitely one of the best. How could I not have an impression of her? Linny shrugged innocently. That's true. Kong Xiaobo nodded in agreement at Lin Yi's words. Tang Yun's beauty was the kind that people wouldn't easily forget. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many boys who were mesmerized by Tang Yun's beauty after just one look. Whatever, let's eat. I'm hungry. Linny grabbed a tofu roll and stuffed it into his mouth. Not bad, it's pretty good. Heh, of course. Whose mom did this? Kong Xiaobo chuckled in satisfaction at Lin Yi's praise. Linny looked at Kong Xiaobo, not knowing what to say. You sound like I'm your mom? Ahem. Kong Xiaobo coughed awkwardly. Let's eat. Let's eat. Here, boss, a toast to you. Kong Xiaobo raised his beer. Linny smiled and raised his beer as well, clinking it with Kong Xiaobo's. It didn't take long for the other dishes that Kong Xiaobo ordered to arrive. Tang Yin, however, seemed to be looking for trouble. She'd either throw the skewers on the table or bump into Linny on purpose. This pretty girl was quite interesting. Linny looked at the angry Tang Yin. He found it funny. She wanted to kick him out. There was a class at night, so Lin Yi and Kong Xiaobo didn't drink much. They finished the bottle in their hands and finished the food on the table. Kong Xiaobo stood up to pay the bill. Auntie, How much is it? Ah, Een, go and do the math. Mrs. Tang still had a few more sets of barbecue on the other tables, so she sent Tang Yun to do the math. 80. Tang Yun came to Lin Yi's table and glared at Lin Yi, thinking that he'd be a scammer. Kong Xiaobo blinked. He and Lin Yi ordered at most 40 kuai. How could it be 80? But seeing how confident Tang Yin was, he didn't want to argue with his goddess. He took out 100 kuai bill from his pocket and handed it to Tang Yin. Wait, Lin Yi stopped Kong Xiaobo. I think I got it wrong. I calculated it. 20 mutton skewers is 20 kuai, 2 lamb chops is 8 kuai, 2 chicken necks is 4 kuai, 2 tofu rolls is 2 kuai, 2 bottles of beer is 4 kuai. That's 38 kuai, right? Tang Yin didn't expect Lin Yi to calculate the bill with her. She blushed and felt uncomfortable. She wasn't a greedy person. The reason why she said 80 kuai was because she was annoyed with Lin Yi's gentlemanly behavior. She wanted to expose him, but Lin Yi didn't say anything. This made Tang Yin even angrier. She thought, since you like to pretend so much, then go ahead and pretend. I'll charge you a bit more to vent my anger. In the end, Shield Bro questioned Tang Yin when she said 80 kuai. Yin, what's wrong with you? How can you calculate the bill? Although Mrs. Tang was busy with the barbecue, Tang Yin wasn't far from her. She could hear the conversation between Tang Yin and Lin Yi clearly. She was angry when she saw her daughter giving a random price to the customer. She scolded her daughter with a stern face. Tang Yin was already angry because of Lin Yi. Now that she was scolded by her mother, she couldn't hold it anymore. She pursed her lips and raised her head to look at Lin Yi. Her eyes were spitting fire. She wanted to burn Lin Yi to death. I don't want the money anymore. Leave. I'll treat you to this meal. I don't want to see you again. She was on the verge of sobbing. She didn't wait for Lin Yi to say anything before covering her face and running away. She didn't even say goodbye to Mrs. Tang, who was beside her, as she ran towards the school. Tang Yin's strong reaction surprised Lin Yi. He didn't expect Tang Yin to have such a strong side. This child. Mrs. Tang didn't know what was wrong with her daughter today. The boy in front of her helped her out. Not only was she not grateful, but she was also angry at him. This put her in a difficult position. She looked at Lin Yi apologetically. Young man, Yin isn't like this usually. She's very sensible. I don't know what's wrong with her today. I'm sorry. I'll treat you to this meal. I won't charge you. You still have to pay, Lin Yi smiled. He felt around his pocket and found 40 kuai in change. He gave it to Mrs. Tang. Here's 40. I'm a little thirsty. Here are 2 bottles of water. Keep the change. Lin Yi didn't wait for Mrs. Tang to reply. He took out 2 bottles of water and gave one to Kong Xiaobo. Let's go. Kong Xiaobo snapped out of his daze. He didn't know what to do as he watched Tang Yin run away. He didn't know what to do until Lin Yi paid for the water. Boss, why are you treating us? Didn't I say I'd pay? Haha, it's the same. You can treat us next time. Lin Yi turned around and walked towards the school. Kong Xiaobo quickly said goodbye to Mrs. Tang and followed Lin Yi. Next time. Mrs. Tang nodded enthusiastically at Kong Xiaobo. Of course. Kong Xiaobo replied. What a sensible child. Mrs. Tang sighed as she watched Lin Yi's back. She didn't know what was wrong with her baby girl. She was afraid that these two wouldn't come again. Boss, what happened today is weird. Xiaobo caught up to Lin Yi, but Tang Yun was nowhere to be seen. She was long gone, evidently long gone. What's weird about it? Lin Yi didn't think too much about it. You, on the other hand, be careful. Don't let Zhou Ruoming cause trouble for you. With Lin Yi's reminder, Kong Xiaobo remembered that he had offended Zhou Ruoming's group. Boss, don't scare me. I just offended Zhong Pingliang, and now Zhou Ruoming. How am I supposed to live here? Don't be too flamboyant. They won't do anything to me if I follow you. Lin Yi said. You're right, but boss, the news of you slapping Zhou Ruoming's probably going to get out pretty soon. You're going to be one of the big 4 soon. Xiaobo said with a chuckle. What's so good about that? Lin Yi glared at him. What happened today was purely because of you. Now I have to bear the name of a big 4. No way, boss. Can you bear to see Tang Yin get bullied? Kong Xiaobo smiled. Chapter 90. Taking out his anger on the test paper. Chapter 90. Venting his anger on the test paper, Xiaobo stuck his head out of the window as he walked past 12th grade class 9, trying to see if Tang Yin was in the classroom. His neck was about to turn into a giraffe when Lin Yi pulled him back. All right, if the homeroom teacher of class 9 sees you, you'll be in for it. Ugh. Kong Xiaobo pulled his head back. I wonder if Tang Yin is back yet? You think you can catch up to her? Lin Yi asked impolitely as he looked at Kong Xiaobo. Nope. Xiaobo, on the other hand, was quite self-aware as he shook his head. Then why are you still looking? What a waste of time. Lin Yi smacked the back of his head. Go back and study. Let's see what you're going to do if you can't get into university. It's not that I can't catch up to her, but do you think it's possible for you, boss? Xiaobo smiled bitterly. I was thinking that maybe Tang Yin would treat you differently after you saved the damsel in distress. Who knew? She'd treat you differently. HM? Kong Xiaobo's words made Lin Yi think of another problem. Did Tang Yin think that he was saving the damsel in distress? Or did she use Zhou Ruoming to put on a show? If that was the case, she might have misunderstood that he was pursuing her like Zhou Ruoming. If that was the case, then Tang Yun's abnormal behavior was understandable. What a girl with a strong sense of self-awareness. A faint smile appeared on Lin Yi's lips. But it was interesting. If it weren't for the fact that he had a mission to attend to, he would have thrown himself into school life and enjoyed the flirtatious, subtle relationships between students of his age. Let's go. Class is about to start. Lin Yi reminded Kong Xiaobo as he quickened his footsteps. The bell for the evening class had already rung. Kong Xiaobo did not dare to stay any longer. He followed Lin Yi into grade 12 class 5's classroom. Meng Yao and Yushu had returned a long time ago, and they were whispering something to each other. Yushu glanced at Lin Yi before turning back to her conversation with Meng Yao. What surprised Lin Yi was that Pinliang wasn't in the classroom. His two underlings, Gao Xiaofu and Zhang Naipeo, were there, but Pinliang's seat was empty. But it didn't take long for Xiaobo to get some information from someone else. A police car had come to the school and taken Pinliang away. This result surprised Lin Yi. Could it be because of brother Heibao? If Heibao bro couldn't hold on and bit Pinliang out, then it meant that the kid was pretty unlucky. The tutoring class at night was also a test. An hour before, the students handed in their test papers, and the committee member in charge of studying would take a stack of papers and hand them out randomly. The teacher would then explain the questions while the students marked each other's papers before summarizing the results. This way, the teacher wouldn't have to mark the papers. In the 12th grade, there were tests almost every day, and this was quite suitable for the fast-paced life. What surprised Lin Yi, however, was that the committee member in charge of studying was Yushu. He hadn't expected this girl to be in charge of the class. After the exam, Yushu handed out a stack of test papers as she walked up to Lin Yi. She didn't even look at Lin Yi as she tossed him a test paper with a straight face and went off to hand out the others. Yushu smiled evilly as she turned around, but quickly put it away. Meng Yao? Lin Yi was speechless as he looked at the name on the test paper. How could there be such a coincidence? Lin Yi was 100% sure that Yushu had done it on purpose. Most of the boys in the class dreamed of marking Meng Yao's or Yushu's papers one day. It was just a paper. But the fact that it was something they'd worked on meant that there'd still be traces of the two of them left on it. Doing it this way would be a way to get closer to them and satisfy their fantasies. Regrettably, however, Yushu and Meng Yao's papers were always swapped. As time went by, Yushu would be suspected of using her position to cheat, but no one dared to expose it. This time, however, Yushu gave Meng Yao's paper to Lin Yi, leaving her and Lin Yi's papers last. She was planning to give Lin Yi's paper to Meng Yao, creating a coincidence. After handing out the papers, Yushu took the two papers back to her seat and put them in front of Meng Yao with a smile. Yao Yao, you pick one? What do you mean? Don't we always mark each other's papers? Meng Yao looked at Yushu strangely. This time, I accidentally gave out your paper. Yushu explained. So, forget it. Meng Yao knew that Yushu would make a mistake every time she did this. She might have accidentally given out the wrong paper. Whatever, anyone will do. Meng Yao didn't care since it wasn't her paper. Oh, I'll give you this one then. Yushu tossed Lin Yi's test paper to Meng Yao before sneaking her own test paper to Lin Yi. Lin Yi? Ming Yao looked at the name on the paper and paused for a moment before understanding what was going on. She turned around and saw Yushu, who was pretending to be fine. Yushu was the one who did it. Ming Yao knew it was Yushu. Yao Yao, what's up? Yushu raised her head with a smile, as if she didn't know what was going on. Let me see your paper. Ming Yao looked at the paper Yushu was covering tightly. She wanted to snatch it away. What's there to look at? Yushu felt guilty as she tightened her grip on the paper. Give it to me. Ming Yao snatched Yushu's paper away forcefully, and Yushu let go, afraid that she'd tear the paper. Ming Yao, on the other hand, glared at Yushu when she realized that it was her own paper. Shu, where did you put my paper? I gave it to Shield Bro. He took it away. Yushu thought evilly. Yes, he did. I'm so pissed. Ming Yao was speechless at Yushu's actions, but she was used to Yushu's personality. She knew that Yushu was the type that wanted to see the world in chaos, so she didn't say anything. Chapter 91. Chapter 91. Sensational results. Yushu couldn't help but shiver at the sight of Meng Yao's messed-up papers. This was way too much. She couldn't help but chuckle to herself when she thought about the expression on Lin Yi's face when the results were announced. Lin Yi, on the other hand, didn't think that his paper would end up in Meng Yao's hands. He thought that Yushu was just messing around and gave him Meng Yao's paper. Boss, whose paper are you marking? Kong Xiaobo asked casually as he turned his head. Meng Yao's, Lin Yi said awkwardly. Seriously? Kong Xiaobo's eyes went wide as he stared at the name on Lin Yi's paper. Seriously? How did her paper end up in your hands? Didn't she and Yushu take turns marking papers? How would I know? Yushu sent me this one, Lin Yi said with a shrug. She must have sent it to the wrong person. Kong Xiaobo sighed. Boss, you're really lucky. Meng Yao's paper is one of the things that all the boys in the class want to get close to, but you got it. Lin Yi smiled, not explaining. There really wasn't a way to explain this. He couldn't just tell Xiaobo that Yushu did it on purpose, could he? Kong Xiaobo would definitely ask why Yushu did it on purpose, and his relationship with Meng Yao would be exposed as well. As for Meng Yao's test paper, Lin Yi was very serious about it. Meng Yao was always fierce to him, but Lin Yi knew that most of the time she didn't mean what she said. Especially that night when Yushu invited him to dinner with her. Lin Yi could tell that Meng Yao was a good person at heart. She was just a little spoiled, that's all. Meng Yao's grades weren't bad, but it was inevitable that there would be mistakes on the papers. Lin Yi would write down her mistakes on the back of the paper as he marked them, writing down the correct way to solve them, even more detailed than what the teacher had taught him. What surprised Lin Yi was that Meng Yao had solved the last extra question, and it was the exact same way the teacher had taught her. It seemed that the girl was quite hard-working. However, Lin Yi knew another way to solve the extra question. He didn't know if the teacher hadn't noticed, or if the teacher thought that the basic solution was enough for this extra question, but Lin Yi didn't tell them the shortcut solution. Of course, none of the students objected to it. This extra question was difficult, and it was beyond the scope of the syllabus. There were very few people who could solve it, let alone get it right. Lin Yi wrote down the solution he knew on the back of the paper and flipped the paper to the front. He calculated the score, 139, which was a high score. Usually, the exam questions were harder than the real exam questions, and this was a common practice in these high schools. It was the only way to improve the students' overall ability, and it also made them feel more pressured. After finishing the last extra question, the teacher asked everyone to write down the marker's name at the back of the paper and then pass it to the front. This was to prevent people from grading the paper carelessly. Meng Yao gave Lin Yi a 0 and signed her name at the end of the paper. Even if Lin Yi saw it, he wouldn't dare cause trouble for her. When the marks were being recorded, Yushu looked at Lin Yi's paper and smiled. She then said to the teacher, Lin Yi, 0? Teacher Lu froze. Not only was Teacher Lu stunned, but the other students who were paying attention to the results were also stunned. It had been a few years, and they had never heard of anyone giving a 0. Other than cheating, there was no way someone could give a 0 even if they were blind, right? Who marked the paper? Teacher Lu frowned. Meng Yao, Yushu said with a grin. Teacher Lu nodded. She vaguely knew that Peng Zhan, the director of the school, was behind Lin Yi, and Meng Yao was Peng Zhan's daughter. These two didn't have much interaction in the school, but who knew where Lin Yi came from? And when he came, he got into a huge conflict with Meng Yao's pursuer, Zhong Pingliang. It was complicated, and Teacher Lu didn't want to interfere. These young masters and princesses were the hardest to manage. So when she heard that it was Meng Yao who marked the paper, Teacher Lu didn't say anything. Yushu's voice wasn't loud, but the class was quiet, so everyone heard her. They couldn't help but look at Lin Yi sympathetically. The boys were thinking that Lin Yi had somehow pissed off Miss Chu, and that she gave him a 0. How unlucky. The girls, on the other hand, were a little disdainful. Lin Yi looked like a gentleman, like a pretty boy in an idol drama. They weren't happy that Meng Yao gave Lin Yi a 0, but no one dared to say anything to Meng Yao's face. Lin Yi was the most surprised. When he heard that he got a 0, his expression was indescribably weird. But he could guess that it was Meng Yao who marked his paper, so it wasn't a surprise to have such a miraculous result. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gotten a 0 even if he purposely wrote a few wrong questions. Looking at Yushu's evil smile, Lin Yi was speechless. A 0 was a 0. What was there to be happy about? Kong Xiaobo knew that Lin Yi marked Meng Yao's paper, so when he heard Yushu say that Lin Yi's paper was marked by Meng Yao, he couldn't help but widen his mouth into a 0 shape, just like Lin Yi's score. There was something going on. There must be something going on. How could it be so coincidental? Kong Xiaobo turned his head and looked at Lin Yi with an inquisitive expression. Although Meng Yao gave Lin Yi a 0, it was still more obvious. If there was nothing going on between the two, why would Meng Yao purposely make things difficult for Lin Yi? Looking at Kong Xiaobo's inquisitive gaze, Lin Yi smiled bitterly and spread his hands, indicating that he was innocent. However, Kong Xiaobo was a little puzzled. Lin Yi's expression showed that he was innocent. Besides, although Kong Xiaobo thought that there was something going on between Lin Yi and Meng Yao, now that he thought about it, it wasn't possible. Lin Yi just transferred here a few days ago, and he didn't even talk to Meng Yao. How could there be something going on between the two? Could it be a coincidence? Chapter 92. Chapter 92. Did she cross the line? Meng Yao looked at the nonchalant Lin Yi in the front passenger seat, a little confused. She thought that she'd get a scolding from Lin Yi after school, since she'd caused Lin Yi to lose a lot of face in front of the whole class. Meng Yao had vented her anger at Yushu on Lin Yi's test paper, but regretted it when Yushu announced the results. She felt that she'd gone overboard, and was prepared for Lin Yi's scolding on the way home from school. She'd prepared for the worst-case scenario. She'd just apologized to Lin Yi if the worst came to worst. She'd just apologized to him. But Lin Yi hadn't mentioned the results ever since he'd gotten in the car. He didn't even say a word, just sitting there quietly like he always did. Meng Yao couldn't sit still when Lin Yi didn't say anything. Why wasn't he reacting? Was he really angry? Meng Yao felt a little resentful at the thought. She'd even prepared herself to apologize to him, and he was still putting on airs? Hey, how can a man be so stingy? Meng Yao hemphed, unable to hold it in any longer. Lin Yi was thinking about when he'd give the medicine to Huaijuan when Meng Yao's words startled him. He turned around, confused. Are you talking to me? Of course. Is there anyone else in the car other than you? Meng Yao said, a little displeased. Ugh. Lin Yi looked at Faubert, sweating profusely. Oh, Faubert, you're really pitiful, getting castrated by the miss for the second time. Ahem. Faubert coughed helplessly as Lin Yi stared at him. Ugh. Meng Yao realized that she'd been being too presumptuous. She'd let Faubert enter the palace once more. Faubert's the driver, so he doesn't count. I'm talking about you. A driver doesn't count as a man? Lin Yi was even more speechless. What kind of theory was this? However, seeing that Faubert didn't say anything, Lin Yi naturally wouldn't say anything. How am I stingy? Are you mad at me for marking your papers today? Meng Yao said as she glared at Lin Yi hatefully at the question he already knew the answer to. Marking papers? What's there to be angry about? Lin Yi was confused. Yushu was the one who gave us the test paper. Yushu, on the other hand, could see that he really didn't know what Meng Yao was talking about. She held back her laughter as she explained. Shield bro, Yao Yao's trying to say that she gave you a 0. Do you hate her for that? Oh. Linny finally understood what Meng Yao was talking about. It's fine. I've already thrown it away. Looking at Lin Yi's nonchalant attitude, Meng Yao was pissed off. She apologized to him out of goodwill. And what kind of attitude was this? She wouldn't have bothered with him if she knew he didn't care. Even if she gave him a 0, at least it had her signature on it. The other boys in the class were dying to have it, but he threw it away. The atmosphere in the car was a little awkward. Lin Yi didn't usually talk much, but Meng Yao was always chatting away with Yushu the moment they got into the car. Today, however, her face was dark and sullen, as if she wasn't happy at all. Yao Yao, okay, it's my fault today, okay? Don't be angry anymore. Seeing the weird atmosphere between Meng Yao and Lin Yi, Yushu, the culprit, apologized to Meng Yao carefully. She grabbed Meng Yao's arm and swung it back and forth. I'll deal with you tonight. Meng Yao naturally couldn't get angry at Yushu, but she still glared at her. You just want to see the world in chaos. In fact, Linny didn't care about what happened earlier at all. He came to school with the idea of enjoying the high school life. It was all part of his mission, so why would Linny take it seriously? Maybe he would run into the forest again one day, and everything here would just be an interlude in his memory. It would become an eternal memory. After dinner, Meng Yao pulled Yushu upstairs, probably due to the awkwardness of what had happened during the day. Lin Yi didn't hold back either and started wolfing down the food in the dining room. General Wei Wu, on the other hand, saw Lin Yi gnawing on the ribs and got jealous. It stuck its tongue out and walked around the dining room. Perhaps its instincts told it that Lin Yi was a dangerous person, so General Wei Wu didn't dare to go near him. However, it was greedy for the ribs in Lin Yi's hands. Before Lin Yi was here, Meng Yao and Yushu's leftover ribs would all go into General Wei Wu's stomach. But since Lin Yi came, it could only eat his high-grade dog food. Although the dog food was high-grade and expensive, it couldn't compare to the delicious ribs. But it wasn't stupid. Dogs like Rottweilers had high IQ, and they were more sensitive to the outside world than humans. This was why many places trained large numbers of police and military dogs. Humans couldn't sense it, but dogs could. So General Wei Wu was quite afraid of Lin Yi's murderous aura on the day he came. From its perspective, Lin Yi was a dangerous person. So no matter how jealous it was, General Wei Wu didn't dare to snatch it. Humans were afraid of death, and so were dogs. Lin Yi looked at General Wei Wu, who was walking in circles in front of the dining room. He could guess what General Wei Wu was thinking. He threw a few ribs that he couldn't chew very well to General Wei Wu. General Wei Wu wanted to cry. Since when did he get treated like this? He could only eat the leftovers of others? How humiliating. But it was better than nothing, right? Plus, Lin Yi was looking at him. If he didn't eat it, he might get beaten up. With that thought, General Wei Wu happily ate the ribs Lin Yi threw to him. It didn't feel so wronged after tasting the aroma of meat that it hadn't tasted for a long time. It was good enough that it was able to eat it. Meng Yao and Yushu went upstairs and took out the test paper they did today. They were ready to reread their mistakes so that they wouldn't make the same mistake in the future. She regretted it when she was in school, so she didn't look at the test paper that Lin Yi marked for her carefully. She only looked at the marks left by Lin Yi when she got home. Meng Yao's heart ached as she looked at the pretty handwriting, listing all of her mistakes on the back of the test paper, along with the solutions. She regretted what she'd done today. She'd messed around with Lin Yi's answers and gave him a 0, but Lin Yi had gone to the trouble of listing all of her mistakes out, even listing out the solutions. She really went overboard. Chapter 93. Chapter 93. Strange Dreams. Yao Yao. What's wrong? Yushu asked, startled as she looked at Meng Yao, who looked like she was about to cry. It's nothing. Meng Yao sighed softly. Shu, do you think I went overboard today? Not at all. Yushu could tell from Meng Yao's voice. Could it be that she was still thinking about what happened today? Yao Yao didn't seem like a sentimental person, did she? Maybe. He doesn't really care. Meng Yao shook her head. Yao Yao, your test paper? Yushu asked, surprised as she realized that Meng Yao's test paper was filled with the steps to solve the problem. Shield bro wrote this for you? He's pretty nice to you. It wasn't his duty to help people write out the solutions to the wrong questions when he was marking other people's test papers. Everyone listened to the teacher's instructions on how to solve the questions, and they were supposed to fix it themselves when they got back. But Linny had written out the steps for Meng Yao's problems. Yushu understood why Meng Yao was doing this. Meng Yao didn't say anything as she focused on her mistakes. Yushu turned her attention to her own test paper as well, seeing that Meng Yao was focused on studying. She didn't think that Lin Yi's steps were even more detailed than the teacher's instructions. Meng Yao was a little surprised. Lin Yi seemed to be afraid that she wouldn't be able to understand the problems. Every step was so detailed that he even had annotations. Meng Yao was starting to doubt Lin Yi's identity. Just where did her father find someone like this? She'd thought that he was a migrant worker when she first saw him, but how could a migrant worker know how to solve 12th grade math problems? Meng Yao was a little surprised when she saw the last question. Hadn't she solved it already? She'd been feeling a little proud when Mr. Liu explained it to her. Everyone in the class hadn't been able to solve it, but she'd solved it. Meng Yao's vanity was satisfied. But when Meng Yao saw the steps, she couldn't help but be stunned. This was a solution she had never seen before, but it was much simpler than her own method. Meng Yao couldn't help but feel touched. She knew that Linny was doing this for her own good, and he wasn't just being perfunctory. Otherwise, he wouldn't have needed to write down this solution. Shu, look at this question, Meng Yao said with a sigh as she pushed her paper towards Yushu. At first, Yushu thought that Meng Yao was asking for her help because she couldn't do the test. But when she saw the problem Meng Yao was pointing at and how Linny had solved it, her jaw dropped. Seriously? Shield Bro is that strong? Not only was he good at fighting, but he was also good at studying. Yao sis, you've earned big. Big? Meng Yao looked at Yushu, confused. Where can I find a guy like this? You have to make the first move, or someone else will beat you to it, Yushu said. Meng Yao pursed her lips in disdain. Him? Who would be interested in him? Hee. Yushu smiled mischievously. Minnie, wait and see if you don't believe me. Lin Yi finished his food and threw the 2 spare ribs to General Wei Wu. Linny wanted to keep them for tomorrow morning, but it was the weekend, and Faubert said that he would take care of all 3 meals. Meng Yao and Yushu would definitely be sleeping in, so there was no need for him to wake up early to make breakfast. Linny went back to his room and laid down on his bed. There were a lot of things to do today, and he had to boil Huaijuan's medicine in the afternoon. Linny was really tired, and he didn't want to get up after a day of practice, right? It shouldn't be a big deal if he missed a day of practice, right? Linny hesitated. He hadn't slept since coming out of that strange cave, spending every night practicing. The good thing was that he'd be full of energy after practicing, and it felt like he'd slept for 10 hours straight. Linny didn't dare slack off when he was at home, with old Lin watching over him no matter how tired he was. But when he was on a mission, Linny had to stay alert at all times, and he didn't dare sleep for real. He'd never been in a situation like this before. Without old Lin watching over him, and with no danger around him, Lin Yi decided to slack off. As expected, people became lazy when they were at ease. Linny sighed. He was really tired today, and Lin Yi didn't want to practice. All he wanted was a good night's sleep. Lin Yi felt like he'd entered a space of nothingness, a field of darkness. Lin Yi became alert immediately. What was this place? Was it a dream? Suddenly, following Lin Yi's thought, the space of nothingness suddenly became as bright as day, and a figure gradually condensed in front of him. Who are you? Lin Yi asked subconsciously. He hadn't had a dream for many years, and Lin Yi had gradually forgotten the feeling of a dream. But today, was he dreaming? My surname is Jiao. The figure slowly condensed into the appearance of an old man. He had a sage-like appearance, and he spoke calmly in front of Lin Yi. What? Sexual intercourse? Lin Yi looked at the old man in front of him in shock. How could this person be more vulgar than me? Why did he use this word the moment he opened his mouth? Could it be that he'd watched too many pornographic movies, and his mind had been corrupted? Even in his dreams, he was talking about these filthy things? The old man suddenly felt awkward. My surname is Jiao, and I'm called Jiao Yazi. What? Foot? Lin Yi was even more shocked. What kind of dream was this? Was it a joke? Jiao Yazi was speechless. This nickname hadn't been used for many years, and he didn't expect this kid to use it. He was a little displeased. It's Jiao Yazi, not Foot. You little kid, don't be rude to this old man. Sorry, Jiao Lao. I heard wrongly. Linny was a little embarrassed, but he thought, it's just a character in a dream. I don't have to care so much about it, right? Do you think you're dreaming? Jiao Yazi seemed to see through Lin Yi's thoughts, and he sneered and looked at him. Am I not? Lin Yi was stunned, and he looked at Jiao Yazi strangely. Chapter 94. Chapter 94. Training Space. Lin Yi couldn't help but feel a little awkward at Jiao Yazi's words. If Jiao Yazi said so, then he wasn't dreaming. Besides, a dreamer wouldn't think about whether or not he was dreaming. Then where am I right now? Lin Yi eliminated the possibility that he was dreaming. Where was he now? Just a second ago, he was in Meng Yao's bed, and the next second, he was in this strange place. This is the fourth dimension of the Jade. Jiao Yazi humphed coldly. I really didn't think that there'd be someone as stupid as you in this world. You've made me wait in the Jade for so many years, and now you're finally here. What? I'm in the Jade? Lin Yi wasn't a coward, but after hearing Elder Jiao's words, he couldn't help but reveal a shocked expression on his face.
Yes.
Jiao Yazi frowned. Was this the fated one? This fated one was a little too weak. Then how did I get in? Lin Yi asked. Jiao Yazi had said that he'd been waiting for Lin Yi in the Jade for so many years, and Lin Yi had only just come in. I came in as soon as you went to sleep. Jiao Yazi said faintly. Wah. Lin Yi was stunned. It's that simple? How hard did you think it would be? Jiao Yazi rolled his eyes. But I have nothing to say to you. It's been so many years, and you haven't slept at all. You. Using my senior's words, you're too amazing, too amazing. Lin Yi was speechless. He'd gotten the Jade Pendant along with a copy of The Art of Dragon Slaying. He'd been training according to the method in the manual ever since, replacing sleep with training, and it had been a few years in the blink of an eye. I've been training with The Art of Dragon Slaying. Lin Yi scratched his head, embarrassed. Of course I know you're training with The Art of Dragon Slaying. I can see it in the Jade. Jiao Yazi humphed coldly. But I really admire you. After all these years of useless training, you're still able to keep going. You're even better than Yu Gong. Ugh. It's not really useless, is it? I've already reached the late stage of the first stage. Lin Yi smiled bitterly. This time, it was Jiao Yazi's turn to be puzzled. He suddenly extended his hand and placed it on Lin Yi's arm. Lin Yi wanted to dodge, but he didn't expect Jiao Yazi's speed to be so much faster than he'd imagined. It was practically teleportation. However, what puzzled Lin Yi was that although Jiao Yazi seemed to have touched him, he didn't feel anything at all. It was as if an illusory figure had touched him. In such a harsh environment outside, you could still break through to the late stage of the first stage? You're quite a talent. Jiao Yazi was a little surprised. Hearing Jiao Yazi's praise, Lin Yi's face finally revealed a trace of a smile. This Jiao Yazi, from the beginning, either called him an idiot or mocked him, saying that he was amazing, but in reality, it was the opposite. This time, he finally praised him. But, what a pity. Jiao Yazi shook his head regretfully. Originally, you could have cultivated to this level in a few months, but you used almost 10 years. Talents will also be wasted, wasting the best age for cultivation. Ugh. Lin Yi didn't expect Jiao Yazi's final words to hit him. He was speechless. However, Jiao Yazi's words made Lin Yi a little disappointed. Could it be that I'm destined not to break through? He couldn't help but feel a little sad. You mean, I can't break through the first stage and advance to the second stage? Break through the first stage? Your goal is only to break through the first stage? Jiao Yazi was startled. He didn't expect this guy to have such a low requirement. Could it be that I can continue to break through? Lin Yi was also startled. If you entered here 10 years ago and didn't say those big words, I'm guessing that you would have broken through the third stage by now. Jiao Yazi said with a face full of pity. However, with your current age, although it's not difficult to break through the third stage, the older you get, the greater the obstacles will be. Lin Yi wanted to cry, but no tears came out. Thinking back, He was really the victim of his own diligence. Originally, after obtaining the Xinyuan dragon beheading skill, he started to cultivate diligently. In the end, it led to the current situation. If he knew this would happen, he would have just taken a nap. Sigh, but don't be discouraged. Although you can't become as powerful as Grand Uncle Master, you can still break through the third stage. That's already impressive enough. Zhao Yazi saw that Lin Yi was disappointed, so he comforted him. Maybe if there's another mutation, you'll become super powerful in an instant. It's hard to say. After hearing Zhao Yazi's words, Lin Yi was a little more open-minded. If he followed Zhao Yazi's words, it was not bad. Thinking of the endless benefits that this Xinyuan dragon beheading skill brought him just to the late stage of the first stage, wouldn't he be even more powerful when he broke through the third stage? Thinking of this, Lin Yi felt that he did not need to be so greedy. You're saying that I have a chance to break through the first stage now? Lin Yi was naturally pleasantly surprised when he thought about it. Of course. Zhao Yazi nodded. The energy contained in this space is a few times, or even tens of times that of the outside world. Your cultivation speed here will also be a few times faster than the outside world, especially when it's time to break through. Because of the harsh environment outside, the energy is thin, so it's impossible to provide the huge amount of energy needed to break through in an instant. This is also the main reason why you repeatedly failed to break through. This was the first time Lin Yi heard about energy. Originally, when he cultivated, he did absorb something similar to vital qi from the natural world, but he did not know what it was. Perhaps it was called vital qi in some martial arts novels, but it was what Zhao Yazi referred to as energy. However, I advise you to stop talking about me and you. Hurry up and cultivate. The mechanism of the stone door was personally set up by Martial Granduncle. Not to mention that I'm just an illusion. Even if I were here in person, I wouldn't be able to force it open. Zhao Yazi glanced at Lin Yi and said faintly, if you don't want to miss this 5-year period, then stop talking nonsense. Lin Yi was shocked. That's right, the 5-year period was about to end, but he did not expect to unintentionally discover a shocking secret of this jade pendant. Originally, he thought that this jade pendant was just a mysterious item that could predict misfortune. He did not expect that this jade pendant was actually a cultivation space. Moreover, there was a person named Zhao Yazi waiting for him inside. Chapter 95. Just like that? Hold on, one last question. Lin Yi forced himself to ask when he saw Zhao Yazi's impatient expression. Speak. Zhao Yazi replied indifferently. Who are you? Who is that senior uncle of yours? Lin Yi couldn't hold back his curiosity. I'm Zhao Yazi. I've already told you. Elder Zhao said faintly, my grandmaster is naturally a very powerful person, but you don't need to know, because it has nothing to do with you. You don't need to think about becoming his disciple, just because you got lucky and picked up the jade pendant and practice scroll he left behind. That's not going to happen. Ugh. Lin Yi paused as he looked at Elder Zhao's don't even think about it expression. Elder Zhao had a neutral expression on his face. But it wasn't like this, was it? Did I offend him? However, Lin Yi understood why Zhao Yazi was so upset. Since the person who left the manual was his martial uncle, then if he were to take that person as his master, he would naturally become Elder Zhao Yazi's senior. He would definitely be unhappy. Lin Yi smiled. Of course not. Even if I were to become his disciple, it would be you, Zhao Lao. At least you know what's good for you. Zhao Yazi forced a smile on his face when he heard Lin Yi's words. Since you're so sincere, I'll reluctantly observe you for a while. Lin Yi smiled. He didn't want to expose Elder Zhao's thoughts, so he didn't say anything else. He sat cross-legged on the ground and entered a meditative state. Since Zhao Yazi didn't want to talk about his senior uncle, there was no need for him to ask. He would say what he needed to say, and there was no point in asking what he shouldn't say. A huge amount of energy rushed into Lin Yi's body from all directions. This sudden phenomenon shocked Lin Yi. Although the absorption of energy in the forest was faster than in the city, it wasn't this fast. It was endless. Lin Yi felt like his body was about to explode, so he slowed down his cultivation. Lin Yi looked at Elder Zhao, who had a mocking expression on his face, a little helpless. This old man is definitely messing with me on purpose. He didn't even warn me before cultivating. Does he want me to die? Even though Lin Yi slowed down his cultivation, the surrounding energy was still rushing into Lin Yi's body. It was just that the speed was slower. Not long after, Lin Yi felt that the energy in his body had reached its limit. However, the surrounding energy was still rushing into his body at the same speed as before. Cold sweat dripped down Lin Yi's forehead. What's going on? This has never happened before? Although Lin Yi was shocked, he couldn't stop the energy from rushing into his body. At this moment, Lin Yi felt like his body was like a magnet, constantly absorbing the energy from his surroundings. Jiao Yazi. Lin Yi felt like he was about to explode. He had no choice but to ask Jiao Yazi for help. However, Jiao Yazi was still looking at Lin Yi with a playful expression. He didn't have any intention of helping. Boom! Lin Yi felt that his body could no longer withstand the huge energy. His whole body felt like it was about to explode. The clothes on his body turned into charred pieces and flew in all directions. Phew! Just when Lin Yi thought that he was finished, he was surprised to find that he wasn't dead yet. He was standing in front of Jiao Yazi with an indescribable feeling of comfort. Breakthrough? Lin Yi was speechless. He had never broken through before, and he had never felt the feeling of being full of energy when breaking through the critical point. Lin Yi was speechless. He thought that he was going to explode, but in the end, he broke through. No wonder Jiao Yazi had a playful expression on his face. It seemed like he had expected this result. As expected, Jiao Yazi opened his mouth and said, "Breakthrough? How is it? Not bad, right? It feels good, but I didn't expect the energy here to be so strong. I broke through directly. That scared me." Lin Yi smiled bitterly. You were already at the critical point of breaking through. It's just that the environment outside is bad. There isn't enough energy for you to break through in one go. Jiao Yazi laughed and said, "There is enough energy here. Once you enter the state of cultivation, you naturally broke through instantly." After hearing Jiao Yazi's explanation, Lin Yi realized that he had already cultivated to the late stage of the first stage. It was just that he didn't have the conditions to break through. But the energy here was abundant, so he broke through instantly. As for the sudden influx of energy into his body, it would only happen during the moment of breakthrough. It wouldn't happen during normal cultivation. "Thank you, Mr. Jiao." Lin Yi bowed to Jiao Yazi sincerely. No matter what, Lin Yi was very grateful for Jiao Yazi's help. Seeing the serious Lin Yi, Jiao Yazi was a little surprised. After a while, he said, "All right, kid, don't be so serious. You can call me Jiao Lao or Old Jiao in the future. Forget about Mr. Jiao. Then I'll call you Jiao Lao." Lin Yi nodded and said, "Jiao Lao, I wonder if I can continue to cultivate the second stage of the Xinyuan dragon slaying art?" "Second stage? Do you have it?" Jiao Yazi was stunned and asked. You don't have it?" Lin Yi was also stunned and looked at Jiao Yazi in surprise. "If you didn't go through the stone door to take out the second stage, where would I go?" Jiao Yazi was a little speechless. "Isn't this the secret cultivation manual left behind by your martial granduncle? Don't tell me you haven't cultivated it before?" Lin Yi was even more speechless. "Just because it's left behind by my martial granduncle, I have to cultivate it before?" Jiao Yazi rolled his eyes and said, "My cultivation direction is different from this. Only you can cultivate it, I can't." "Oh, is that so?" Lin Yi scratched his head awkwardly. He was limited by his normal thinking. Jiao Yazi was right. He didn't have to cultivate what his martial granduncle left behind. "If I knew how to, why would I ask you to hurry through the stone door?" Jiao Yazi was a little helpless. "Don't think that I can help you. I'm just an illusion. My function is similar to that of a commentator. I can only explain the use of this cultivation space and entertain you when you're bored. As for the rest, you'll have to rely on yourself." Chapter 96. Accompany us shopping, Elder Jiao. Apart from being a cultivation space, does this jade pendant have any other uses? Lin Yi was thinking about the jade's predictive abilities. Since Jiao Yazi was the owner of the jade, he should know about it. Yes. Zhao Yazi nodded. What other uses? Lin Yi was delighted. So Zhao Yazi knew about it. But I don't know the specifics. Zhao Yazi shook his head. Senior granduncle modified it himself. I've never worn it before, so how would I know? Once you open the stone door, there should be an explanation inside, right? Should? Lin Yi asked, uncertain. I've never been inside the stone door. How would I know? Zhao Yazi said, as if to say, don't ask me, I don't know. All right. Lin Yi was a little disappointed, but it was only for a moment. It was already good enough that he'd gotten what he'd gotten today. He just hoped that it wasn't a dream. The sky was already bright by the time Lin Yi woke up. It looked like it was 9 in the morning. He'd slept for a really long time. Lin Yi couldn't help but stretch as he sat up on the bed. Wait. Lin Yi suddenly remembered the dream he'd had last night. It was Zhao Yazi in the training space. Lin Yi touched his body subconsciously. In the dream, his clothes had exploded into pieces when he broke through the first stage of the art of dragon slaying. But when Lin Yi touched his undamaged pajamas, Lin Yi's heart sank. Was it just a dream? Lin Yi couldn't help but feel a little disappointed at the thought. He'd finally broken through, and he'd be able to open the stone door after 5 years. But was it all just a dream? Kid, you're in the Jade, and only your mind is in the virtual training space. Your clothes won't be torn. A voice rang in Lin Yi's mind, startling Lin Yi, but Lin Yi was overjoyed. Zhao Yazi, it was Zhao Yazi's voice. Zhao Lao, is that you? Lin Yi asked. Of course it's me. Zhao Yazi said. You can communicate with me telepathically, no need to speak. Is that okay? Elder Jiao, can you hear me? Lin Yi asked Elder Jiao in his mind. Yes. Zhao Yazi answered. Zhao Lao, since you can communicate with me telepathically, why didn't you remind me to enter the training space in the Jade earlier? Lin Yi asked curiously. Before you entered the training space in the Jade, I couldn't establish a mental connection with you. Zhao Lao snorted. Only after you entered the training space did you establish a mental connection with the training space. Did you think the Jade was still hanging on your body? Isn't it? Lin Yi was shocked. His hand reached for the Jade on his chest, but there was nothing there. The Jade that was hanging on his chest had disappeared. Where's the Jade? Zhao Lao? Elder Jiao couldn't help but feel a little smug at the nervousness in Lin Yi's voice. The Jade has already established a connection with you, and it's already fused into your body. The Jade has completed the process of recognizing its owner, so it won't be taken away easily. Normally, it'll be hidden in your body, but you can summon it with your consciousness. Oh. Lin Yi was stunned. He didn't expect the Jade to recognize its owner. Following Zhao Lao's words, Lin Yi summoned the Jade with his thoughts and made it appear on his chest again. Soon, Lin Yi touched the Jade that he had worn for nearly 10 years. Lin Yi let out a sigh of relief and let the Jade return to his body. This was good. He didn't have to worry about losing the Jade. Previously, when Lin Yi got the Jade, although he didn't flaunt it and the Jade didn't look eye-catching, he was still afraid that it would be stolen. This time, Lin Yi could finally let go of this worry. Thinking that everything last night wasn't a dream, Lin Yi's mood was unusually good, especially when he successfully broke through the first stage of the art of dragon slaying. This made Lin Yi even happier. After getting out of bed, Lin Yi quickly washed up and left the room. He saw that Meng Yao and Yushu were already awake, leaning on the sofa and watching cartoons on TV. Seeing Lin Yi coming out of the room, Meng Yao only glanced at him. Thinking about yesterday's incident, she wanted to say something, but she didn't know what to say. She could only move her eyes to the cartoon. On the other hand, Yushu rolled her eyes when she saw Lin Yi coming out. She waved at Lin Yi. Shield bro, come shopping with me and Yao Yao later. What do you think? Me? Lin Yi blinked and pointed at himself. Yeah, help us carry our bags. Yushu nodded. Can I not go? Lin Yi smiled bitterly. Carry bags? This job didn't seem that good. Ahem. Toilet paper. Yushu pretended to cough twice and said to Lin Yi sneakily. Ugh. Lin Yi was pissed off. Did this girl make a living out of this? Once a day? Was there an end to this? Shu, why are you coughing? Did you catch a cold? Meng Yao heard Yushu coughing and asked for toilet paper. She quickly passed the tissue box on the coffee table to Yushu. Ah, Yushu blinked, realizing that Mingyao had misunderstood her. She stuck her tongue out at Mingyao before pulling out a napkin and pretending to cough a couple of times. Lin Yi was amused. He shook his head and went back to his room to change. No matter what, the only thing he could do before Pengzhan gave him the mission was to stay by Meng Yao's side. Since she was out shopping, he followed her. When Lin Yi came out of his room, Faubert came with breakfast. It was the hotel's chef's congee with pork and century egg and some exquisite pickles. Lin Yi helped Faubert put the breakfast on the table, and Faubert left with the food box from last night. Meng Yao and Yushu turned off the TV and came to the dining room to eat. Meng Yao pursed her lips as she watched Lin Yi leave. She wanted to ask Lin Yi to eat with her, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. Shield bro, let's eat together. We have to go shopping later. I don't have time to wait for you. Yushu called out to Lin Yi before Meng Yao could say anything. Hey. Meng Yao was a little annoyed. Why did Shu get to eat first? She wanted to be nice to Lin Yi because of what happened yesterday, but she didn't get the chance to. Never mind, this was fine. She was Lin Yi's employer, and she paid his salary. What right did she have to be nice to him? He should be the one doing it. Chapter 97. Chapter 97. Unconscious Habit, Sure. Lin Yi had just broken through the first stage of the art of dragon slaying, and while he didn't have the second stage's chant to practice, he was still in a good mood. He'd finally gotten rid of a huge rock that had been weighing down on him for years. Yushu took out 3 bowls from the disinfecting cabinet, and Lin Yi quickly filled them up. He looked at the table and decided to sit down with Yushu. Yushu was a little weird, but Lin Yi felt that she was much easier to get along with than Miss Chu. Plus, the two of them had a secret in common, and while it wasn't something they could use against each other, it had improved their relationship a lot. Meng Yao and Yushu were quiet as they ate their porridge, but Lin Yi couldn't care less. He'd learned proper dining etiquette, but Lin Yi couldn't be bothered to follow it at home. Time was precious back in Africa, after all, and there was no time to eat like a gentleman. Even the female members of the squad would finish their food in 2 or 3 bites, or there was no telling where the enemy's rocket launchers would come from. Eating so fast, aren't you afraid of choking to death? Meng Yao curled her lips as she watched Lin Yi walk back to his room after finishing 2 bowls of porridge. She and Yushu hadn't even finished their porridge yet, and they'd only finished half of it. Guys eat fast, Yushu said nonchalantly. My brother eats this fast when he comes home, too. Meng Yao nodded. She knew that there were rules in the platoon, too. What if the enemy showed up on the battlefield? But Lin Yi hadn't been a soldier before, so why was he eating so fast? Lin Yi, on the other hand, didn't have the time to listen to the 2 girls commenting on his eating speed. He was thinking about when he'd deliver the medicine to Huaijuan. Lin Yi had wanted to deliver it today, but Yushu had asked him to go shopping with them, so he couldn't go. Forget it, he'd think about it when he had the time. Huaijuan wasn't going to die anytime soon anyway, and he still had the painkiller prescription he'd given him last time. Lin Yi took out the bank card Faubert had given him when he got back to his room. Lin Yi was planning on buying a laptop, and it'd be much easier for him to search for information. A lot of medical stuff could be downloaded from the internet, and Lin Yi wouldn't have to waste time going to the bookstore. Before he left, Lin Yi changed the dressing on his leg, applying a layer of the medicine he'd made yesterday. He didn't have to go to the hospital to change the dressing today. After all, that tough nurse from yesterday was too much for him to handle. His medicine was a lot more effective than the normal medicine the hospital gave him, too. He looked around the room. There wasn't much left for him to bring. So Lin Yi walked out of the room to see Meng Yao and Yushu already dressed up. They were wearing the exact same dresses, and even their hairstyles were similar. They were carrying the same bags, and they looked like sisters. The 2 were dressed more brightly than they usually did in school. There were too many flies in the school, and the 2 had to keep a low profile on purpose. It was the weekend, though, and there wasn't much to say when he went shopping. You're wearing this? Yushu pointed at Lin Yi's uniform, her mouth agape. She'd seen Lin Yi go back to his room after eating, and she'd thought that he was going to change his clothes. She hadn't expected him to still be wearing his school uniform. What's wrong with it? Lin Yi thought that the uniform was pretty good, and the quality was impeccable. As expected of the best school in the city, even the high-end brands couldn't compare. Do you think what you're wearing suits us? Yushu giggled at Lin Yi's matter-of-fact look. Meng Yao, however, thought of something else. Lin Yi, didn't Faubert give you anything else other than your school uniform? Nope. Lin Yi shook his head. And the clothes I wore when I came. When you came? Meng Yao remembered Lin Yi's look at that time, the white singlet that was starting to turn yellow, and the yellow tattered pants. It was enough to make her faint. Forget it. You can wear this. Get me 2 more decent outfits later. Even if you're my follower, you still need to look presentable. Meng Yao would just buy him 2 outfits later. The one he was wearing now was a little weird, but it was a lot better than his own. Yeah, I'll follow you guys from afar. No one will know that we're together. Lin Yi nodded understandingly. Meng Yao's face froze. Who told you to follow them from afar? Going out together means going out together. What was the point of you following them from afar? Meng Yao, however, was a reserved person. She couldn't bring herself to say that out loud. She didn't know why, but ever since this Lin Yi had entered her life, everything that had to do with him would become a mess. Meng Yao couldn't help but feel annoyed. Leaving the villa, Lin Yi didn't see Faubert's Bentley. He was confused when he saw Meng Yao open the garage door with a remote control. There was an Audi S5 parked in the garage. The domestic model was A5, a bit lower profile than the R8. Lin Yi didn't expect Meng Yao to have a car of her own. Lin Yi couldn't tell that Meng Yao knew how to drive, considering how Faubert usually drove. You drive. Meng Yao threw a bunch of keys in Lin Yi's hand. Me? I don't have a license yet. Lin Yi had never driven without a license before, but that was when he was on a mission or when he was killing people. Driving without a license was a small matter. Meng Yao frowned at Lin Yi's words. Get Faubert to get one for you. Wouldn't it be inconvenient to go shopping with us? Haha, Faubert's already doing it. He hasn't gotten it back yet. Lin Yi smiled faintly. Meng Yao had unknowingly accepted the fact that he was by her side, and she wasn't as intense as she was a few days ago when she was trying to chase him away. Now that they were talking about the future, it meant that Meng Yao wasn't as resistant as before. Then you sit in the back seat. I'll drive. Meng Yao pointed at the back seat. Lin Yi said to Lin Yi. The S5 was a sports car with a single row of doors. The back seat could only be accessed from the front. It was a little inconvenient, but with Lin Yi's skills, it wasn't a problem at all. With a light push, Lin Yi jumped in. Chapter 98. Let me do it. What's going on? Meng Yao looked up at the long line of cars in front of her, trying to see what was going on. Shield bro, go take a look and see what's going on. Yushu said casually to Lin Yi. Ugh, I'd rather you go down. Or you'd have to go down first. Lin Yi said with a bitter smile. Yushu remembered that Lin Yi didn't have a door at the back, so she got off the car by herself. There were a lot of people watching, but a pretty girl like Yushu made way for them. It didn't take long for Yushu to run back to Meng Yao. Yao Yao, there's a car accident up ahead. I don't think we'll be able to get there for a while, right? It can't be, right? Let's find a place to park the car and take a walk. Meng Yao said helplessly after hearing Yushu's words. There's a public parking lot over there. Yushu said as she pointed at a parking lot not too far away. Ugh, Shu, you're a little naughty. You think I can park there? Meng Yao said as she looked at the parking space above the car park. There was a Toyota Coaster in front and a Jinbei van in the back. The 2 cars were huge, and the parking space in the middle was very small. Normal people wouldn't be able to park there at all. Meng Yao's Audi S5 was a little smaller, but parking there was still a lot of trouble. Parking spaces were scarce in the business district, and it was a weekend too. How could there be a parking space so easily? It would have been taken a long time ago. Then what do we do? Yushu didn't think too much about it since she wasn't driving. She looked at the parking space. It really wasn't easy to park there. Is that so? Let's park the car on the side of the road then? Meng Yao said as she started the car and parked it on the side of the road. Lin Yi looked at the big "No Parking" sign beside the car before looking at Meng Yao, stunned. It's not like I'll lose points if I get a ticket. Faubert'll take care of it, Meng Yao said with a shrug, seeing through Lin Yi's thoughts. Lin Yi sighed to himself. The miss was the miss after all. He thought she was different from the other rich kids, but they all had one thing in common. Money didn't matter. I'll do it, Lin Yi said as he took the keys from Meng Yao's hands. getting into the driver's seat. Hey, what are you doing? You don't have a driver's license, do you? Meng Yao was caught off guard, and Linny grabbed the keys from her. Cars parked illegally will be towed. Linny pointed at the fine print at the bottom. Don't you see what it says? I'm afraid if you stop here, we won't be able to go back. With that, Linny didn't wait for Meng Yao to reply. He started the car and stepped on the gas, speeding towards the public parking lot on the left side of the road. Linny abruptly turned the steering wheel back just as the car was about to reach the parking lot, pulling the handbrake and turning the steering 5 meters and 180 degrees. The car drifted beautifully, neatly into the parking lot. Linny had seen a video on the internet about snatching parking spaces. He thought it was interesting, so he found a broken car to practice it twice. Oh, Meng Yao thought that her car was done for as she watched the car spin on the ground. She was just regretting letting Lin Yi take the keys when she realized that the car was parked properly in the parking spot she'd been waiting for. Drifting. Yao Yao sis, did you see that? It's really drifting. Shield bro knows how to drift? Yushu exclaimed excitedly. Didn't he say he doesn't have a driver's license? He's lying. Meng Yao was a little envious of Lin Yi's drifting skills, but the fact that he didn't have a driver's license pissed her off. What a liar. She'd been his driver for half a day for nothing. He was so good, and he said he didn't know how to drive. Huh. Meng Yao remembered that Lin Yi didn't say he didn't know how to drive, only that he didn't have a license. Lin Yi got out of the car under the shocked gaze of the toll collector. He gave him 5 kuai before locking the car and running over to Meng Yao and Yushu. Done. Lin Yi handed the keys back to Meng Yao. Hey, you didn't damage my tires, did you? Meng Yao mumbled. Haha. Lin Yi smiled. Shield bro, you know how to drift? When are you going to teach me? Yushu was very curious about how Lin Yi had parked the car. We'll talk about it when you get a car, Lin Yi said perfunctorily. Drifting wasn't something that could be taught. He'd learned it after watching the video twice, but that was based on his agility, coordination with his body. One wrong move, and the car would be in trouble. Oh, I have a car. It's in my garage. You can teach me when we get back, Yushu said excitedly. Wow. Lin Yi blinked. He didn't expect Yushu to have a car as well. All right, I'll teach you when I'm free, Lin Yi said. Meng Yao found Yushu's begging to be a little shameless. What right did she have to do that? He was just a shield her dad had hired. Did she really have to do this to get him to teach her something? Hey, you have to teach me. My daddy's paying you, Meng Yao said. All right, I'll ask Mr. Chu if I can teach you guys drifting. Lin Yi nodded with a smile. You dash. Meng Yao was pissed. Why did it seem like this guy treated Shu better than him? Meng Yao's heart ached at the thought. She was the miss here, all right? Let's go, Yao Yao. Let's go shopping first. Yushu wasn't in the mood to watch Lin Yi and Meng Yao fight. It wasn't easy for them to go shopping today. Of course, they had to buy more stuff. 12th graders didn't have much time to waste. Even girls with high IQ like Meng Yao and Yushu couldn't be careless. After all, there were quite a lot of people with high IQ. Meng Yao thought about it and agreed. It was rare for them to go out. She was a little bored, but she didn't bother with Lin Yi. She held Yushu's hand and walked forward. Lin Yi chuckled and followed the two. When they reached the scene of the car accident, Lin Yi glanced at it casually and paused. He furrowed his brows, lifted his leg, and walked quickly towards the crowd. Lin Yi wasn't a nosy person, but he couldn't just ignore what happened today. There was a familiar face at the scene of the car accident. It was Wang Xinyan, who he met on the train. She was standing next to a red sports car with a helpless face. She was holding a phone and standing there anxiously. Beside her, there were 2 middle-aged men and women pointing at her and saying something. Chapter 99. Meeting someone familiar. Meng Yao wasn't too happy to see Lin Yi squeezing his way to the scene of the accident. He wasn't a cop, so what did it have to do with him? Shield bros going over. Let's go take a look. Yushu felt that Lin Yi must have something interesting going on. She grabbed Meng Yao's hand, wanting to follow Lin Yi. I'm not going. You go by yourself. Meng Yao's anger towards Lin Yi hadn't subsided yet, and it was only natural that she wasn't happy to see him meddling in other people's business. Oh, never mind then. We'll go buy some clothes. Yushu looked at Lin Yi longingly as Mingyao dragged her towards the mall. Shield bro won't be able to find us later, right? Don't we have a car? Just wait for us by the car if you can't find us. Mingyao had a reason to be pissed off. There was a pretty girl standing at the scene of the accident, and Mingyao, naturally, had seen her. Seeing Lin Yi charging at a pretty girl like that was a huge blow to Mengyao's self-esteem. He lived with her every day, and yet he was always thinking about other girls. What kind of person was this? Was her charm level that low? It was Ling Shan a few days ago, and now it was this unknown girl. Mengyao's face darkened even further when she saw Lin Yi talking to the pretty girl. It seemed like they knew each other a long time ago. No wonder he was so enthusiastic. Yushu, naturally, didn't know what Mingyao was thinking about. Did she have to be this angry? Could it be that Yao Yao had been having that for the past 2 days? Why else would her temper be so weird? Yushu thought evilly. Yes, it was possible. It was very possible. She needed to get a thorough checkup tonight. Heh. The scene of the accident was surrounded by 3 layers of people, but it wasn't hard for Lin Yi to squeeze his way in. Make way. Unrelated people, please disperse. Lin Yi yelled as he squeezed through the crowd. Those who were squeezed by Lin Yi and wanted to complain shut their mouths subconsciously when they heard Lin Yi's words. They took the initiative to make way for Lin Yi. They regarded Lin Yi as a traffic policeman or a hospital worker who handled the scene. Otherwise, who would say such a thing? Lin Yi squeezed his way in just in time to see the middle-aged woman pointing a finger at Xinyan's nose and yelling, "I'm telling you, if anything happens to my dad, you'll be going to jail." "Auntie, I told you, it wasn't me," Xinyan said, feeling wronged. "This is the business district. I'm not even going 30. It was this grandpa who fell in front of my car. I didn't even touch him before I slammed on the brakes." "Humph, he fell right in front of your car. Who else could it be but you? I'm telling you, this isn't over." The middle-aged woman glared at Xinyan. "Why are the ambulances in Songshan so slow? Do you want to quit your job? Hubby, give their mayor a call." "All right, stop arguing." The middle-aged man glared at the woman. "What are you arguing about? Dad's mental illness is acting up. It has nothing to do with this girl. Stop making things difficult for her." "Huh. She's so pretty that she doesn't even care about her own father?" The middle-aged woman didn't care about Xinyan anymore. She pointed a finger at the middle-aged man and started arguing. "What? You're so powerful now that you've forgotten how my dad raised you. You're still yelling at me? You're still helping that little bitch? All right. Huira, are you done? You know what's going on. You're the one who forgot to bring my dad's medicine, and you're pushing the blame onto someone else." The middle-aged man himphed, dissatisfied with his wife. "Fine. I've been the daughter-in-law of House Lu for so many years, and this is how you treat me." Huira's eyes flashed fiercely. She reached out to grab Xinyan's face. "You like this bitch? I'll tear her face apart. Let's see if you feel bad for her." Slap. A hand gripped Huira's wrist tightly. She couldn't move an inch. Who's pulling me?" Huira was startled. She turned around to look at the person. If she really hit someone, she'll take responsibility. Lin Yi looked at Huira coldly. From her behavior and words, he could tell that this woman's background wasn't ordinary. She did things without a care in the world. Since Xinyan drove a sports car, her family background must be extraordinary. But this woman didn't care at all. It was obvious that she wasn't afraid of causing trouble. Plus, she kept talking about getting the head of the health bureau fired and calling the mayor. That was proof enough. Of course, he couldn't rule out the possibility that she was bluffing, trying to extort more money. "Who are you?" "Honey, look at this pretty boy. He's meddling in other people's business. He even wants to hit your wife. Lu Tianyi, are you going to do something about this?" Huiru shouted again. "All right, little brother, this has nothing to do with you. Don't get involved. Let go of her. You'll have to bear legal responsibility if you hit someone." Lu Tianyi frowned at Huiru's shouting. He turned to Lin Yi. "Hit someone? I'm just stopping her from hitting someone." Lin Yi laughed coldly, but he still let go of Huiru. He wasn't afraid of anyone, but he was on a mission right now. He didn't know how long he'd be in Songshan. He didn't want to cause trouble. Lu Tianyi blushed at Lin Yi's words. He glared at his wife. He didn't know what to do with this wife. When House Lu was in trouble, he married his wife's family, House Zhang. With the Zhang family's help, they managed to protect their family business. But this wife of his relied on what happened back then. She acted like a tyrant in front of him. He didn't have any dignity as a man. But then he remembered that she was his wife and had given him a pair of beautiful and handsome children, so he could only endure it. It was just that he'd gotten older these past few years, and his wife was starting to suspect that he had another woman outside. She'd start crying and throwing a tantrum at the slightest sign of trouble. Tianyi couldn't do anything about it at all. She'd bring up what happened all those years ago whenever he got angry, even going to his father and complaining that she'd had a change of heart. Tianyi couldn't handle it at all. "Are you okay?" Lin Yi let go of Huiru and turned to Wang Xinyan. Lin Yi came because Wang Xinyan helped him on the train. Even though Lin Yi didn't need her help, Lin Yi still felt grateful. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.